the Admiral of Hogwarts. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story and all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 326 Candidates. Hagrid was very satisfied with the image Veneto had designed for him. At 5:30, they left Hagrid's hut together and headed for Hogwarts Castle, where they happened to see the Durmstrang students disembarking from their ship. As they approached the candlelit Great Hall, it was almost full. The Goblet of Fire had been moved and now stood on the staff table in front of Dumbledore's empty chair. Fred and George's chins were smooth again. They seemed to have accepted their defeat and were loudly discussing their guesses about the champions. Did you know that Veneto is already the most likely student from our house to participate in the competition? Marietta, a 7th year, leaned over and said as soon as Hugo and the others sat down, because the Triwizard Tournament has so many combat-related events, everyone thinks that, compared to others, Veneto is actually the most suitable student to participate in the Triwizard Tournament. I think so too, Hugo nodded in response. Don't think that just because I've experienced real combat, I'm better. If it's a competition with a limited range like the arena, Veneto is definitely stronger than me. Amidst everyone's discussion, the feast began. Although this year's feast seemed more lavish due to the presence of guests, everyone had just had a feast not long ago and were eager to see the champions from each school, so they ate very quickly. To his surprise, he discovered that in the students' discussions, Veneto had become one of the top 3 most popular champion candidates for Hogwarts. The other two were Cedric Diggory from Hufflepuff and Valens from Slytherin. Finally, the golden plates returned to their original spotless state, and the hall erupted in a sudden surge of discussion with no food to hinder their chatter. Talk about the Goblet of Fire and the Triwizard Tournament filled the entire hall, and naturally, the most discussed topic was the word champion. When Dumbledore stood up, the entire hall immediately fell silent. Whether it was the heads of the other 2 schools on the stage, the Ministry of Magic officials, or the students below, all eyes were focused on him, and countless faces showed the same sense of anticipation. Well, the Goblet of Fire is about to make its decision, Dumbledore said. I estimate it will take about a minute. Listen, after the names of the champions are announced, I want them to walk to the end of the hall, then along the staff table, and into the room next door. He pointed to the door behind the staff table, where they will receive initial instructions. He took out his wand and waved it dramatically. Instantly, all the candles except those in the pumpkin lanterns were extinguished. This scene was actually quite shocking, especially in the dimness, which further highlighted the Goblet of Fire burning with blue-white flames, drawing the attention of everyone in the hall. Although the blue-white flames were a bit dazzling like an electric welder, no one wanted to look away. Everyone watched, waiting. Leon even noticed that several people took out their watches and glanced at them from time to time. This minute passed somewhat slowly. Finally, the flames in the Goblet of Fire suddenly turned red, and crackling sparks burst out with a soft sound. A tongue of flame shot into the air, and a piece of parchment with obvious scorch marks on the edges was ejected along with a large puff of flame, which Dumbledore easily caught. Countless eyes focused on Dumbledore's hand. The headmaster looked at it in the light of the flames and immediately announced, "The champion for Durmstrang," he said in a clear and powerful tone, "is Victor Krum." Obviously, Durmstrang's chosen champion was widely expected, and the entire hall was filled with applause and cheers. When the sound subsided a little, the second piece of parchment was also ejected. "The champion for Boxbuttons," Dumbledore said, "is Fleur Delacour." Everything is normal now, and the butterfly effect is not as strong as imagined, Hugo thought. He watched Fleur gracefully stand up and walk towards the staff table. After Fleur Delacour also entered the next room, the hall fell silent again. This time, the silence was filled with a palpable sense of excitement, because now it was time to choose the Hogwarts champion. At this moment, Hugo noticed that many eyes were wandering between Cedric, Valens, and Veneto. He also felt a little nervous at this time, because he hoped from the bottom of his heart that Veneto would be chosen for the competition to deal with complex situations. At this moment, the Goblet of Fire turned red again, sparks burst out, and a tongue of flame shot high into the air. After this familiar process was completed, Dumbledore drew the third piece of parchment from the tip of the flame. "The champion for Hogwarts," he said loudly, "is Vittorio Veneto." Applause and cheers immediately drowned the entire hall, Especially every Ravenclaw student, who abandoned their usual reserve and screamed, stomped their feet, and cheered for the Ravenclaw student who had become the school's champion. The other houses, although a little disappointed that the champion was not from their own side, were also convinced by the wisdom and strength that Veneto had previously shown. As Veneto headed towards the small room, Hugo noticed that the heads of the other two schools also had smiles on their faces, apparently feeling that Veneto was younger and not a match for their contestants. Excellent. When the noise finally subsided, Dumbledore said cheerfully and loudly, "Well, now our 3 champions have been chosen. I believe you will all do your best to support your champions. By cheering for the champions, you will also make a great contribution to this event." Speaking of this, Dumbledore suddenly stopped, and at the same time, everyone in the hall focused their attention on the goblet of fire, which was still burning. The flames on the cup, which should have been extinguished by now, had not gone out, but had turned red again, and crackling sparks were bursting out. A long tongue of flame suddenly shot into the air, carrying another piece of parchment. Dumbledore seemed to instinctively reach out a slender hand and grab the parchment. He held it far away, staring at the name written on it. There was a long silence. Dumbledore stared at the piece of paper in his hand, and everyone in the hall stared at Dumbledore. Then, Dumbledore cleared his throat and read aloud, "Harry Potter." For a moment, the hall was as silent as death. But soon, a buzzing sound spread through the hall. Many people looked in surprise at the goblet of fire, which was now extinguishing. "The goblet of fire must be broken," Ron roared at this moment, followed by a chorus of voices from the house tables, because everyone knew that Harry had indeed written a piece of parchment with his name on it. And that piece of parchment had indeed been thrown into the goblet of fire by Veneto earlier. But the problem was that only one contestant could be chosen from each school. In this case, it was obviously strange that Harry had become Hogwarts' second contestant. Quiet down," Headmaster Dumbledore shouted decisively. "Harry, you go over there first and join the other champions, and we'll be over in a little while." Chapter 327. The Fourth Person. Under the surprised gazes of everyone, Harry Potter dragged his heavy steps to the lounge at the back. Headmaster Dumbledore and the other headmasters gathered together to discuss the matter. Soon, the headmasters discussed a set of rules, and then Professor Dumbledore led the other headmasters, professors, and Ministry of Magic officials to the teachers' lounge at the back. Seeing this unusual situation, the Great Hall immediately erupted. Almost everyone was discussing the matter of Harry, this unexpected contestant. With their nearby classmates, the Granger siblings were no exception at this time. They seemed to be quietly listening to the discussions of the surrounding students, but in reality, they connected their souls to Enterprise and Veneto's perspectives in the Admiral Network. As the Hogwarts staff member responsible for security and the guardian of the Great Hall doors last night, Enterprise was naturally called to participate in this discussion. "This is too bizarre." From Veneto's perspective, Ludo Bagman was the first to rush into the small room, then stepped forward, pinched Harry's arm hard, and muttered in a low voice, "Absolutely bizarre. Ladies and gentlemen," he walked to the fireplace and said to the other 3 people, "Allow me to introduce, although it seems incredible, the 4th champion of the Triwizard Tournament." Silence immediately enveloped the entire room. Finally, Fleur Delacour, the older of the champions, broke the silence. "Oh, this is a funny joke, Mr. Bagman." "Joke?" Bagman repeated, somewhat puzzled. No, absolutely not. Harry's name just came out of the goblet of fire, but he hasn't reached the age, nor has he shown corresponding strength. How did he pass the selection of the goblet of fire? Yes, it is indeed surprising." Bagman rubbed his chin, smiling as he looked down at Harry. "But, you also know that the age limit, as an additional safety measure, was only implemented this year. Since his name came out of the goblet, then it cannot be changed. I mean, since the selection has reached this point, it is not allowed to escape at the last moment. Harry is destined to be a champion. The rules are very clear, you must abide by them. Therefore Harry must do his best to participate in the Triwizard Tournament." Before Bagman could finish speaking, the door opened again. A large group of people, including Enterprise, walked into the room from outside the door, making the already small room crowded. "What exactly is going on, Dumbledore?" Madame Maxime straightened her burly figure. Her handsome head touched the chandelier filled with candles, and her huge chest in black satin clothes heaved violently. "I would also like to know this, Dumbledore," Professor Karkaroff said, a cold smile on his face, his blue eyes radiating coldness like ice. "The age circle you drew as the strongest white wizard should not be so easily broken through. I admit that some people may be gifted, But I think this Mr. Potter should not have such ability. This matter can only be blamed on Potter, Karkaroff, Snape said softly, his black eyes flashing with hostility. Don't blame Dumbledore, it's all Potter's fault for insisting on violating the regulations. He has been violating school rules since he entered this school. Professor Snape, I know that you and Karkaroff were once colleagues, Enterprise suddenly said at this time, but as a professor, I hope that you can comment on a person based on facts rather than prejudice. You. Snape, of course, could hear what Enterprise was saying at this time, so he immediately closed his mouth, but repeatedly looked at Enterprise and Harry's faces with a malicious gaze. Harry, first take a look at whether this is the piece of paper you threw in. Dumbledore seemed not to have heard the argument of his professors. He gave Harry the piece of parchment with slightly burnt edges in front of everyone, and then asked calmly, "This piece of paper was definitely not written by me," Harry said excitedly after looking at the paper, "because what I wrote on the paper was Hogwarts, Harry Potter, and I used blue ink. And this piece of paper only has the name Harry Potter, and it uses black ink." He must be lying," Madame Maxime said loudly. Snape shook his head and pursed his lips. This attitude really made people wonder which school he was a professor of. "I don't think Harry is lying," Veneto suddenly stood up and said, and Harry immediately looked at Veneto with gratitude. "Little guy, you don't need to defend your classmate. There are so many wizards here. I don't think a muggle-born little wizard can discover anything," Karkaroff said with contempt in his tone. "The level of wizards has nothing to do with their bloodline, Karkaroff. I have seen more than one idiot among pure-blood wizards. Put away your set of faces." Moody angrily tapped his wand on the ground at this time, then turned his head and stared at Veneto with both eyes. "Speak, child, what did you discover?" "I looked at the piece of paper that Harry gave me once before I threw it into the goblet of fire," Veneto sighed softly, and then said calmly, "What I can be sure of is that all the formats of the pieces of paper I threw into the goblet at that time were school plus name. I think the piece of paper in the headmaster's hand should be able to explain this." "Yes, that's indeed the case," Professor Dumbledore said, taking out 3 other pieces of parchment that had just been ejected from the goblet of fire. Everyone could see at a glance that Fleur and Crimm's parchments only had names, while Veneto's parchment had the school name. "Moreover, there are suspicious points on Harry's parchment itself," Enterprise suddenly said, then took the piece of Harry's parchment from Headmaster Dumbledore's hand. "The ink on it is wrong. You're making excuses," Karkaroff shouted furiously. "Are the professors at your Hogwarts also sophistical? This is clearly ordinary ink." "No, this is ink mixed with Australianopoly dragon blood." Enterprise brought the parchment closer to a lamp, and then fiddled with it. When she made the paper and the light form a certain angle, the letters suddenly reflected colorful light. "I have only seen this kind of ink in Wenrenju." After everyone saw the colorful light reflected just now, Enterprise said to everyone present, "This kind of ink is actually a kind of potion. In addition to being able to guarantee that it will not fade for thousands of years, it also has a series of functions such as insect repellent, mildew removal, and moisture prevention. Of course, in this way, it is not only produced in small quantities, but the price is also very high. A small bottle costs 3 galleons. Moreover, this kind of ink will only be sold to members of those wizarding families who are considered to have so-called noble traditions. Excuse me, Harry Potter cannot buy it at all. More importantly, the Goblet of Fire theoretically only selects one contestant from each school." Saying this, Enterprise looked around at everyone present, "And I don't think any of those students have the knowledge and power to change this ancient and powerful alchemy tool, the Goblet of Fire, and make it spit out the name of a 4th person who should not have existed." Chapter 328 Debate. "Miss Halsey, your analysis is excellent." After Enterprise finished explaining the suspicious points she had observed, Moody nodded in approval. "Just like you said, the key point isn't the age limit at all, but why the Goblet of Fire selected an extra person." After saying that, Moody looked at Karkaroff with an expression of caring for the mentally challenged, and then said, "Don't forget, he's Harry Potter. Countless people believe he's Hope, and there are also many who want him dead. So, letting someone who isn't strong enough participate in the competition is also a good way to let him die. We all know that if Professor Moody doesn't discover 6 people trying to murder him before lunch, he feels like the morning has been wasted," Karkaroff said loudly, but he was interrupted by Moody pressing his wand against his neck before he could finish. "I admit that I might be a bit paranoid since I've gotten older, but I'm not so blind that I can't see such an obvious conspiracy. To be honest, this kind of tactic really seems like something your former colleagues would do, doesn't it?" After saying that, Moody revealed a smile, but the scars on his face made the smile look somewhat terrifying. What nonsense are you talking about? Karkaroff seemed a little nervous. My job is to consider problems from the perspective of dark wizards, Karkaroff, you should have forgotten. Alastair, enough. Dumbledore saw that the situation was about to get out of control and quickly stopped Moody. Let's not talk about the past. After saying that, he looked at everyone in the room and said, I think Professor Halsey's guess should be correct. I just checked the Goblet of Fire and found that it hasn't been tampered with or modified. In this situation, I think it's very likely that someone cast a particularly powerful Confundus charm on the Goblet of Fire, entered Harry's name as a student from a 4th school, and ensured that he was the only candidate from that school. As far as I know, such a powerful charm cannot be cast by young wizards. Their magical reserves are simply not enough to complete the spell. After hearing Dumbledore's words, several people nodded subconsciously. In this world, apart from extremely rare individuals like Veneto who have special opportunities to possess the magic of an adult before reaching adulthood, most people's magic increases with age, and Harry Potter's previous performance at school showed that he was no different from ordinary wizards in this regard, so it was impossible for him to use magic to alter such a powerful magical artifact as the Goblet of Fire. But what about this unfair situation now? The Goblet of Fire has already gone out, and it's impossible to select more champions, Madame Maxime said, glaring angrily, but we must abide by the regulations. The regulations clearly stipulate that anyone whose name comes out of the Goblet of Fire must participate in the Triwizard Tournament, and no one else can. Mr. Crouch stood outside the circle of light from the fireplace, his face half hidden in the shadows, looking a bit strange. However, his tone of voice was as stiff and cold as usual. Hey, Barty knows the regulations inside and out, Bagman said, breaking into a smile, turning back to look at Karkaroff and Madame Maxime, as if the matter had been perfectly resolved. I insist that my other students re-register, Karkaroff said. His voice was no longer smooth, his smile had disappeared. And the expression on his face was extremely ugly. You must put the Goblet of Fire back out, and we must keep adding names to it until each school produces 2 champions. That's fair, Dumbledore. Actually, I think it's fairest now, Moody said loudly as well. Because Hogwarts only has 2 4th-year students participating, and the project is an individual competition, not a competition by school, so your 2 schools are at an advantage, and if we're talking about unfairness, this competition is most unfair to Harry. Enterprise sighed. Don't forget, the other 3 contestants here at least made their own decisions knowing the dangers of the competition, only Harry didn't. But he should have anything to complain about. Fleur Delacour couldn't help but ask, stomping her foot. He has the opportunity to participate in the competition, doesn't he? 4 weeks, we've all been hoping to be chosen. To bring glory to our school. And 1,000 galleons in prize money. This is an opportunity that many people dream of, but I believe Harry would rather be standing in the stands than participating in this kind of competition. Enterprise shook her head and said. He already has enough fame, and he doesn't lack this 1,000 galleons. Alright, everyone calm down. Seeing the people arguing in A, Dumbledore coughed and then said. Now, if any of you have a solution, you can speak up. After saying that, Professor Dumbledore waited there. But at this time, everyone quieted down, even Karkaroff, who had been arguing the loudest just now, closed his mouth and looked at the others with resentment. Hugo or me? Bagman asked his colleague. At this moment, Mr. Crouch, who had been in a daze, seemed to suddenly wake up and stood up, then walked to the fireplace. Okay, he said, instructions. Yes, the first task. Barty Crouch seemed a little slow, but he had indeed been very busy with his work recently, so this situation was not surprising. At least in the eyes of Ministry of Magic officials, this situation occurred every few years. The first task is to test your courage, he said to the group of champions, so we're not going to tell you what it is, because daring to face the unknown is an important quality of a wizard. Yes, very important. I think you'll soon know what it is. The first task will take place on November 24th, in front of the other students and the judging panel. When completing the competition tasks, the champions must not ask for or accept any help from their teachers. The only weapon the champions have in hand when facing the first challenge is their own wand. After the first task is completed, they will learn about the second task. Due to the high demands of the competition and the long duration, the champions will not participate in the school year exams. After saying that, Mr. Crouch turned to look at Dumbledore. I think that's all, Albus. Yes, Dumbledore said, looking at Mr. Crouch with some concern. You really don't want to stay at Hogwarts tonight, Barty. It may only be like this, because we have a lot of things to do at this time. Crouch shrugged helplessly, then walked out of the room with Bagman, who wanted to stay and have a drink tomorrow after watching the two Ministry of Magic officials leave. Dumbledore turned his head and extended the same invitation to the other two headmasters. Unfortunately, neither of the two headmasters appreciated it and hurriedly left with their students. Then you guys go back to your dormitories quickly, Dumbledore said, looking at Veneto and Harry with a smile. I believe the students of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw are waiting to celebrate with you. They finally have an excuse to make a lot of noise. It would be too inappropriate to take away their opportunity. Chapter 329 Preparation, Part 1. How many enemies have you actually made? Veneto asked Harry in a teasing tone as they walked out of the room. To the point where such a large sum of capital is needed to prepare to kill you, I think there should be many. Harry naturally heard from Veneto's tone that she didn't believe he had put his name in, so he said easily. Most of Slytherin probably wants to get rid of me, so it's too difficult to identify the enemy. At this time, the corridor seemed empty, and the candle flames had become very small, which made the somewhat eerie smiles on the pumpkin lanterns flicker, looking a bit scary. Plus today was Halloween, and this atmosphere was very suitable for this haunted holiday. But the biggest difference between this Halloween and previous years was that Peeves, the most mischievous one, was watched by the Bloody Baron because there were guests from other schools, so this year's Halloween always felt like something was missing. Soon, the two arrived at the grand staircase on the second floor. Then Veneto said goodbye to Harry and returned to the Ravenclaw Tower, and then opened the door after passing the knocker's inquiry, "Welcome our champion back." As soon as the door opened, Hugo and Hermione pulled Veneto up. At the same time, the Ravenclaw students in the common room all cheered. Don't think that Ravenclaw usually gives people the feeling of being bookworms, and in many places, they don't seem so gregarious. But after confirming that Hogwarts representative came from Ravenclaw, they were just as excited as the students from other houses. Everyone wanted to know exactly how Veneto operated at the time, and how she was able to break through the headmaster's defense and throw her name into the Goblet of Fire. Actually, I think the headmaster's first defense was very simple. Like I said, that magic was purely based on the existence of the ground. If we break the carrier, the magic will naturally cease to exist. Amidst everyone's cheers, Veneto stood on the platform of the stairs, and then explained the principle of her attack that morning to those curious students standing on the stairs below and on the sides. The situation is that simple. As long as the power of your temporary attack exceeds the upper limit that the floor can withstand, the floor and the magic can be destroyed at the same time, and then you can just throw those slips of paper in. After speaking, Veneto glanced at everyone, and as a result, found that everyone had a look of having learned it. After all, Headmaster Dumbledore was present at the time, and it was definitely impossible to demolish the floor with magic, and no normal person could smash the floor with a punch. However, the Ravenclaw students also admitted that, at least when facing the headmaster's age line, Veneto's method could indeed break the headmaster's restriction and throw those slips of paper into the Goblet of Fire. Because of Veneto's selection, everyone celebrated that night until almost 12 o'clock before returning to their rooms to rest. And it was on that night that Hugo gained 7 points of destiny. But gaining so many destiny points did not make Hugo feel very happy, because now he simply didn't know who threw the slip of paper with Harry's name into the Goblet of Fire. At least from the information obtained from Enterprise, he can now confirm that no one used an invisibility cloak or similar item to hide their figure and secretly throw the slip of paper into the Goblet of Fire that night. In other words, there is a dangerous element, most likely Barty Crouch Jr., hiding in the school right now, but Hugo doesn't have any information about him. Our analysis is that the other party is very likely to have used the Imperious Curse to control a certain unlucky person, and then let the unlucky person help them throw the slip of paper into the Goblet of Fire. But this kind of situation, as long as you don't catch them on the spot, it's basically impossible to screen them out. Enterprise earnestly reported to Hugo through the Admiral network, and said a guess that they had made after discussing with other people before. "It's not your fault," Hugo said to Enterprise, who seemed a little frustrated. "You've already done a great job. At least being able to do this step without being discovered is already very impressive. As for the enemy, to be honest, since the other party wants to offer Harry to the Dark Lord, this guy will always jump out. And relative to this guy, our biggest advantage is that relative to them hiding in the dark, there will always be opportunities to catch them." Early the next morning, Hugo and the others went straight to the library to prepare to read. Because of Veneto becoming a champion, They can now access some restricted area books in the library. It has to be admitted that Hugo and the others had indeed obtained a lot of family collections from pure-blood families before, but compared to this 1,000-year-old prestigious school, it was still a lot different. Even though today was a holiday, there were still many students reading there in the library, and most of them were from Ravenclaw. After seeing Veneto come in, these students quickly greeted Veneto friendly, and said that if there was anything they needed help with, they would do their best. After thanking everyone one by one, Veneto took out a book list summarized after yesterday's discussion and applied to Madame Pants for a batch of restricted area books, offensive and enhancement magic. A very good choice, Madame Pants nodded after looking at Veneto's book list. As the librarian, Madame Pants naturally knew that dragon slaying had basically become the signature event of the Triwizard Tournament, so after discovering that Veneto was borrowing books of this kind, she not only gave her the books she wanted, but also recommended several books of this kind to her. There are many spells here that are tailored for me. After borrowing the books and returning to the desk to browse through them, Veneto quickly discovered some pretty good magic. For example, in a thick book called Giant Bodyguard Training Guide, there were many spells recorded that could be used to buff giants in battle. These spells were marked as not usable on the human body, because these spells might greatly increase the reaction ability of personnel, but the human body often cannot support the physical buffs brought by this kind of magic. For example, after using magic to strengthen strength, wizards with insufficient physical strength are very likely to experience some muscle strains or sprains in the body during exercise. But for Veneto, these spells are very meaningful, because this magic can hide her physical differences from others, allowing her to let go and fight hard on the field. As for the buff that the magic itself gives her, it can be said to be minimal. This is mainly because the basis of this kind of enhancement magic is mostly aimed at flesh and blood bodies, and it basically has little effect on existences like ship girls. In addition to spending a lot of time in the library searching for various books she wanted, Veneto also conducted a search in the library of Ravenclaw Academy. Compared to the school library, although the Ravenclaw library is smaller in scale and the types of books are not very complete, the biggest advantage is that it has a lot of ideas from outstanding Ravenclaw students in the past. And for Veneto, who relies on the entire ship girl system, many times, as long as there is a special idea, the ship girls may be able to turn these into reality through research. Chapter 330 Preparation, Part 2. Compared to Veneto, who had gained the recognition of the entire school faculty and students, Harry's situation seemed much worse. Many people, especially the Slytherin students, believed that Harry had used tricks to become a contestant. Fortunately, because of Veneto's earlier actions, the Gryffindor students were willing to believe Harry and accepted his claim that he hadn't submitted his name. However, even with that acceptance, few people in the school thought Harry could win the competition. After all, the Triwizard Tournament was related to combat, and in that aspect, even Harry himself didn't think he could beat Veneto. If there's a wizarding duel in one of the tasks, and I unfortunately end up in a group with Veneto, I think I can only pray she'll go easy on me for the sake of being classmates, Harry said quietly to Ron beside him during breakfast that morning. Ron nodded in agreement, sharing Harry's view. Several Gryffindor students nearby overheard the conversation, but none of them felt it was inappropriate for Harry to say this before the competition. Everyone thought that giving up was a very wise choice when facing an opponent who could kill a giant with their bare hands and punch a 30-centimeter deep hole in a stone floor. Looks like you're quite famous in the school, Hugo joked to Veneto, who was engrossed in eating pickled herring. Now you can achieve victory without a fight. After all, this isn't a life or death battle, and we're all students of the same school. If it's a duel, there's no need for internal strife to make our school a laughingstock to the other schools, Veneto said, glancing at the Boxburton students at the Ravenclaw table. These Boxburton students usually stayed in their carriages, but they would come to the Great Hall for meals. After breakfast, Hugo and his friends headed straight to the library to research various materials along the way. Except for the Slytherins who still looked down on Ryan because of his blood status, most wizards, especially Muggle-borns, showed their welcome and support for Veneto in their eyes. Compared to Harry, Veneto had earned this honor through her own knowledge and strength, making her a true Hogwarts champion. As for Harry, he was now seen as a victim by most people. After the analysis of the ink on the slip of paper, most Hogwarts students believed that a Slytherin student was trying to embarrass Harry. This assumption arose because everyone believed that Harry and Slytherin had a deep-seated hatred for each other. Furthermore, Slytherin housed most of Hogwarts' ancient pure-blood families, and these families often possessed magical knowledge unknown to the outside world, such as manipulating the Goblet of Fire. What are you planning to do to prepare for the competition? Hermione asked Veneda softly. Although she didn't know the plot yet, the first task would definitely involve fighting monsters. I plan to learn a few tricks from St. George, Veneda said quietly. You know, St. George has plenty of experience when facing those powerful magical creatures. You have a point, Hermione immediately realized after Veneda said that. As Veneda said, St. George, with the title of Dragon Slayer, naturally had a huge advantage when facing those magical monsters, but I think you should go easy on them during the fight, Hermione said, quickly thinking of something. At least, I don't think this kind of school competition needs dragon slaying. That's similar to what I was thinking, Veneda nodded. I think it's likely about surviving against the monsters for a certain period of time, or obtaining a treasure guarded by a monster. As for killing monsters, I don't think even professors can do that in a one-on-one, limited space situation. It would be too difficult to ask students to do that. In the following days, everything seemed calm and peaceful at school. The only special things were that Hagrid had bred another batch of blast-ended scroots that were, supposedly, edible, and that Ayla told Hugo and his friends that she seemed to be encountering Headmaster Dumbledore more often recently, at least. For an ordinary Muggle-born first-year witch, meeting Headmaster Dumbledore twice a week on average was definitely not normal. What did the headmaster talk to you about? Hugo asked curiously, because he knew that his Ayla was not just Ayla, but also Ariana. Just simple, everyday chats, Ayla said. But he sometimes brings me candy, and my favorite is the lemon sherbet. I remember the headmaster often had lemon sherbet on his desk, Hermione said suddenly, as if she had thought of something. I think it might be the headmaster's way of remembering his sister. It seemed that the headmaster had indeed become curious about Ayla. However, Hugo wasn't sure what Dumbledore thought of the situation now, but no matter how the headmaster viewed Ayla, time passed day by day. One day, while Hugo and his friends were attending herbology class with the Hufflepuff students, Cho Chang suddenly ran over to tell Veneda to go upstairs for a photo shoot. Good news, the sirens have finally successfully applied for a radio station frequency. So today, the sirens will come as radio station reporters to interview you, Hood said to Hugo through the Admiral network as Veneda left the greenhouse. You guys got a radio station license? Hugo asked in surprise. He had always hoped to obtain some publicity channels, and radio was clearly more real-time than newspapers. Unexpectedly, the shipgirls hadn't been able to apply for newspaper and magazine licenses, but they had applied for the radio channel that Hugo and his friends thought would be the most difficult to apply for. Yes, I think this is mainly because wizards prefer more traditional media, such as newspapers or magazines, rather than listening to the radio, Hood said helplessly. However, the popularity of radios in the UK should increase a lot recently, because we've launched an activity where you get a free radio for every 10 galleons spent. This matter does need to be popularized as soon as possible. Without considering too many economic issues, Hugo instructed Hood upon hearing this. After all, judging from the current situation, war will break out soon, so it's best to prioritize things related to war preparedness. Don't worry, Commander, we're already doing it, Hood said with a smile. Now almost all of our industries are slowly transforming into war state. Once the war breaks out, I only need 2 weeks to fully transition into combat state. Actually, there's no need to be so nervous, Hugo said immediately after hearing Hood say that. The Wizards' war is still different from the ordinary people's war. Basically, there's no need for such nationwide mobilization. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331 Wand Inspection. Prestige was granted permission because she also represented the Ministry of Magic of the Balkans. Therefore, she was able to enter as an official Foreign Ministry of Magic reporter. However, in addition to her credentials, several major deals between the Balkan Ministry of Magic and the British Ministry of Magic recently played a significant role, leading Fudge to personally sign her interview permit. When Prestige walked into the classroom, she found it was a smaller room. Most of the desks had been pushed to the back, leaving a large open space in the middle. However, 3 desks were placed end-to-end in front of the blackboard, covered with a long velvet cloth. Behind the velvet-covered desks were 5 chairs, one of which was occupied by Ludo Bagman, who was chatting with a witch who looked somewhat familiar to Prestige. The witch was wearing a magenta robe, her hair styled into elaborate, stiff, and peculiar large curls. Her thick, Fleshy fingers clutched a crocodile skin handbag, and her fingernails were 2 inches long and painted bright red clearly. Such a getup was unique in the magical world, and coupled with her particular makeup, anyone entering the room would immediately recognize her. Rita Skeeter, a journalist skilled at fabricating news. She could spin countless scandalous stories from your ordinary words, and the fabrication skills of her self-writing quill were even more impressive because the monotonous life of the wizarding world was too dull. Countless people were eager for this reporter to share her newly fabricated stories with them. After seeing that everyone had arrived, Bagman began to announce what they were going to do. We must check that your wands are fully functional and in good condition, because in the upcoming competition events, the wand is your most important piece of equipment, he said. The experts are upstairs with Dumbledore. Then there will be some photos taken. This is Rita Skeeter, he said, pointing to the witch in the magenta robe. She's writing a small article about the Triwizard Tournament for the Daily Prophet. A small article? Whether it was Prestige, Veneto, or Hugo on the Admiral Network, they all felt that Bagman was being overly optimistic. This was someone who could weave a best-selling novel of hundreds of thousands of words with various appealing elements from a single sentence. Honestly, the fact that someone with such talent didn't imitate Lockhart and become a best-selling novelist, but insisted on being a reporter, only showed that Rita Skeeter truly loved this profession, although her way of loving it might be different from normal people. Sure enough, Rita Skeeter then found Harry, who didn't know what was happening, and dragged him into the broom closet next door for a one-on-one interview. After Rita Skeeter dragged Harry away and closed the door, Prestige shrugged and took out her interviewing equipment to interview the other 3 champions. Of course, Prestige, aiming to build an authoritative media outlet, would not ask the kind of tabloid-style questions that Rita Skeeter did, nor would she fabricate the content of the interviews. So, after a very brief interview with a cooperative Veneto, Fleur and Krum also successfully completed their interviews, accompanied by their respective headmasters. Alright, the interviews are over now, everyone please sit down, Ludo Bagman said to everyone after seeing that Prestige had finished her interviews. At that moment, Dumbledore came down from upstairs. Where's Harry? Dumbledore, coming down from upstairs, glanced around the room and then asked Veneto. He was dragged away by the female reporter for an interview, Veneto replied, pointing to the door of the broom closet. Upon hearing this, Dumbledore immediately took 2 quick steps forward and abruptly opened the door of the broom closet, looking down at Rita Skeeter and Harry. Dumbledore. Rita Skeeter reacted immediately and said loudly, looking delighted, "How are you?" she said, standing up and extending a manly hand to Dumbledore. "I wonder if you saw my article about the International Confederation of Wizards conference this summer. It was absolutely wonderful," Dumbledore said, his eyes shining brightly. "I especially loved the part where you portrayed me as a senile old fool. Professor Dumbledore, you really know how to have fun." Hugo, who saw this scene through the Admiral Network, looked out the window silently at this moment. However, Dumbledore's retort was useless against someone with Rita Skeeter's particularly thick skin. She said very naturally, "I just wanted to point out that some of your views are a bit outdated, Dumbledore. Many wizards outside, I would be very happy to hear your frank reasoning, Rita," Dumbledore said with a slight smile, bowing politely, "but I'm afraid we'll have to discuss this matter later. The wand-weighing ceremony is about to begin, and if we continue to dawdle, the ceremony will not be able to proceed." Harry, looking thoroughly annoyed with the reporter, quickly took the opportunity to sit in the chair next to Veneto. After that came the wand inspection. Each champion, after handing over their wand, would undergo meticulous testing. Then, Mr. Ollivander would describe its current general condition and function, and declare that it was in good condition and fully capable of withstanding the upcoming trials. During this inspection, Mr. Ollivander intentionally or unintentionally highlighted the advantages of his own creations, and expressed some opinions on wands made by other craftsmen. Naturally, in these evaluations, Ollivander pointed out the differences between himself and other wandmakers. Of course, there would be a little bit of self-promotion in this comparison, but honestly, the skill levels of the 3 great European wandmakers were similar, only with different focuses. Unlike Ollivander, who advocated the theory of the wand choosing the wizard, Gregorovich allowed customers to choose their own materials, even bringing some to be used in the wand's manufacture, and was a staunch supporter of the idea that the person chooses the wand from a large number of practical examples. Except for a very few wands that did not cooperate well with the wizard, most wands, after a long period of use and some fine-tuning, could meet the needs of the user. However, this was only the difference between different schools of mass-produced wand masters. For some wealthy and hereditary pure-blood wizards, inviting a wandmaker to come to their home for custom measurements was the most common practice. This was why Miss Delacour's wand received a higher evaluation from Ollivander than Crumb's, because the wandmakers who could be invited by those pure-bloods were generally of a high level. After the wand inspection, it was time for the photographer who came with Rita Skeeter to take pictures. After all, the front page of tomorrow's newspaper needed to have a photo. Taking the group photo took a relatively long time because Madame Maxime was too tall and the room was too small. So after adjusting for a long time, she finally had to sit down to take pictures with everyone at the same time. The photographer always wanted to put Fleur in the front, while Rita was particularly fond of Harry, and repeatedly ran to pull Harry to the center position. And the individual photos after the group photo also consumed a lot of time, especially the time spent on Harry, which was 3 times that of others. So in the end, the people in the room didn't finish these things and leave until very late. Chapter 332 Reports and Meetings. I have never seen such an annoying person. She wasn't this talkative when she interviewed the Hood family last time. That evening during dinner, Veneto complained to Hugo about Rita's interview. Last time, she only interviewed a best-selling novelist. How can that compare to the Triwizard Tournament, which has been interrupted for hundreds of years? Hugo shook his head and said, to be honest, you shouldn't be the worst off. Because you only have to endure a short afternoon of her so-called interview, while Harry is facing a situation that should be much worse than yours. The next morning, the newspapers delivered to Hogwarts by outpost confirmed Hugo's guess. Rita Skeeter had indeed put her brain to work and concocted an article that would definitely attract attention. What exactly happened? Just as Hugo was eating breakfast, Harry walked over and asked in a low voice. As soon as he entered the hall, he noticed that everyone was looking at him with a mixture of curiosity, surprise, and admiration. He had asked the Gryffindors earlier, but unfortunately, the Gryffindor students only looked at each other and gave Harry a strange smile, but resolutely refused to say what had happened. Hugo exchanged a glance with his sister, then took out the newspaper they had just been reading and handed it over. The reason is in the newspaper. I hope you're mentally prepared before you read it. Harry unfolded the newspaper and found Rita Skeeter's article about the Triwizard Tournament published. This article was less of a report on the tournament and more of an embellished depiction of Harry's personal life. A large portion of the front page was occupied by a photo of Harry. The entire article, continued on pages 2, 6, and 7, was about Harry. Fleur and Crumb's names were squeezed into the last line of the article and even misspelled as for Veneto. Only her last name was spelled correctly. Her full name didn't even appear in the newspaper. It was as if Harry was the only contestant from Hogwarts. Pages 2, 6, and 7 of the newspaper were all about Harry's love life. It was all about a relationship between Harry and Ron. Rita wrote many nauseating, lengthy passages and even asked others for their opinions of him. Harry has finally found his first love at Hogwarts. His close friend Colin Creevey says that Harry's inseparable from a boy named Ron Weasley. Even after Harry was involved in such a dangerous competition this year, Ron remained loyal to him, as brave as a knight protecting a princess. Okay, it seems that even without Hermione, Harry can still have rumors made up about him. After this report was published, Harry and Ron kept their distance, even trying to avoid being in the same place except for classes on the Saturday before the first task. The school approved students in their 3rd year and above to visit Hogsmeade Village. Veneto, who wasn't worried about the competition at all, naturally wouldn't miss this opportunity. So, after finishing breakfast early in the morning, Hugo and his group left Hogwarts Castle and headed straight for Hogsmeade. Seriously, Skeeter is too good at making things up, Veneto said, chewing on a lollipop. I really didn't expect her to make up a story about gay romance. I think it's because this kind of news is most likely to arouse people's curiosity. You know, people always welcome news that goes down the gutter. For example, the Sun has higher sales than the Times. That's why everyone at school knows that there's no such relationship between Harry and Ron, but they're still spreading these things in private. I admit that some Slytherin students may be deliberately causing trouble by taking this opportunity, but most people are probably spreading that article out of a gossipy, troublemaking mentality. The group bought some things in the shops and then left the commercial district to head back to their restaurant. When they arrived at the restaurant, they found San Giorgio waiting there. The 4 dragons that the Romanians prepared have already set off today. After entering the safe private room, San Giorgio said, relaying news he had received no more than an hour or 2 ago. As he spoke, San Giorgio took out more than a dozen photos from his pocket. These photos were obviously taken by personnel sent by the Ministry of Magic of the Western Balkans. After all, Dragons are a very powerful creature even in the magical world, so neighboring countries need to be notified when they are moved. Chinese fireball, Swedish short-snout, Welsh green dragon, and Hungarian horntail. Looking at the photos, Hugo and the others quickly identified the dragons. Then, the group looked at Veneto together. Even the most powerful Hungarian horntail, I can take it down in 3 to 5 minutes without deploying my ship equipment, so there's not much need to worry about safety. No, I'm actually a little worried about the safety of those dragons, Hugo said with a smile. Seriously, if you really kill a dragon, the scene would be too bloody. You mean, beat them to death with a stick without drawing blood? Veneto smirked. However, Hugo could see from her burgundy eyes that she wasn't just joking after all. Those warships were created for killing from the moment they were born, and this characteristic naturally extended to the ship girls. At least, in the ship girls' eyes, battles with fewer than 3-digit casualties are more like games perhaps for those intelligent humanoid creatures. Ship girls, as beings inclined to kindness, would normally still have a bit of compassion. But killing non-intelligent creatures like fire dragons is no different from killing a chicken in their eyes. Try not to cause incurable wounds, Hugo said, staring seriously into Veneto's eyes. After all, this is a competition, and there are many people watching, so there's no need to make the scene so terrible. Understood? This isn't a war with the enemy after all. After confirming Hugo's thoughts, Veneto nodded seriously. So, I will control my level of violence as much as possible to avoid making the audience uncomfortable. Over the next period, the three tasted some of the new dishes and drinks that the restaurant had launched. These included many Japanese dishes and drinks made with fruit and honey. The reason there were no alcoholic beverages was simple. The British Ministry of Magic issued very few alcohol licenses, and the ministry itself was monopolized by purebloods, making it almost impossible for Notice and the others to obtain a liquor license. It's good that there are no alcoholic beverages. Hugo turned to look at the no smoking sign on the wall and said, at least with no smoking and no alcohol, this restaurant is more suitable for Hogwarts students to come and spend money. You're right. For example, we have more female customers coming to spend money now, compared to men who prefer to drink alcohol. They are more willing to spend more money on food. Notice nodded. More importantly, with such a hotel, we can collect all kinds of meaningful information from the guests, thereby strengthening our understanding of the wizarding world. Chapter 333 Prepare and Chat? On the way back to Hogwarts, Hagrid suddenly found Hugo and the others and invited Veneto to come alone to his hut to find him, avoiding others as much as possible along the way. Thank you, Hagrid, I'll go there when the time comes. Veneto nodded and said, although she already knew what the competition was, accepting the invitation at this time was not a bad thing. So that night, Veneto sneaked out of her dormitory at 11:30 p.m., and then followed Hagrid and Harry into the Forbidden Forest and saw the 4 giant dragons breathing flames into the air at close range. How are these dragons? Are they as you expected? Hugo asked Veneto after connecting to the Admiral network. Compared to the Nabika we raised in Russia, these dragons are considered adult dragons, but their habits, especially combat and flight habits, are similar, Veneto said, looking at Hagrid who was chatting with Charlie. However, compared to the dragon of St. George that I borrowed during previous practice, these dragons are obviously far inferior. At least, they are not as intelligent as St. George's dragon. St. George's dragon is more like St. George's own dragon form. If that dragon were really released, all the dragons on the scene wouldn't be enough for St. George's dragon to fight, Hugo replied with a smile after hearing Veneto's words. The next day at noon, Hugo and the others met Harry in the library, because both sides had people who were about to participate in the competition, so they naturally discussed topics related to the upcoming competition. Have you thought about what to do next? Harry looked at Veneto with a hopeful look. After all, the two of them were about to face the giant dragons, so he naturally hoped to inquire about her ideas from Veneto. It's very simple, Veneto shrugged indifferently. With the flexibility of those giant dragons, they probably won't be able to hurt me. I just need to get close and fight in close combat to knock the giant dragon down, and then everything will be easy. This method of yours may not work for Harry. Ron showed a rather ugly expression, because he knew that what Veneto said was true, so he felt despair at this time. After all, Veneto was able to kill a troll in close combat in the 1st grade, so it is not impossible to knock down a giant dragon in the 4th grade when entering a period of rapid physical development. But the problem is that this method is absolutely impossible for Harry to learn. If Veneto can split the giant dragon in half with a sliding shovel, The biggest damage that Harry's sliding shovel can cause to the giant dragon is that the giant dragon's throat is slightly choked. Otherwise, you should just give up directly after you enter the arena. Ron looked at Harry with a helpless expression. I read the competition rules, and you can declare your withdrawal after entering the arena. If it really doesn't work, then I will consider this, Harry said, rubbing his hair painfully. He is not a fool, so he would rather choose social death between social death and real death. Actually, you have other options, Veneto suddenly said. This is actually my backup plan, but it is obviously useless now, and it can be used by you. What plan? Harry looked at Veneto with an excited look. Although he had already prepared himself for social death, it would naturally be much better to participate in the competition than social death. Remember, you owe me a favor. Looking at Harry, who showed a pleading expression, Veneto smiled and said, solving the problem is very simple, Harry. Think about what you are best at, and then think about the spells that Professor Flitwick has taught recently. Hearing the riddle Veneto was playing, Harry quickly thought about it, and soon a flash of inspiration appeared in his mind. He is best at flying. He needs to cross the dragon from the air and steal the dragon egg. In this case, he needs his Nimbus 3, and to get his Nimbus 3, he needs, I'm going to find Professor Flitwick now. Harry immediately thought of who to ask for help. For him, even if he had to ask Professor Snape for advice at this time, he would grit his teeth and do it. It's not just that. Hermione pushed her glasses and said, as far as I know, the stinging hex can also have unexpected effects when dealing with those huge animals. Compared to the summoning charm, the stinging hex is more versatile. I understand, thank you. Harry seemed much more relaxed than before. After all, people's greatest fear comes from the unknown, and knowing what to do will naturally relax them. However, this relaxation is also limited. After all, Harry's progress in learning the summoning charm is very average. Harry believes that he may need to specialize in this spell for 2 or 3 days to barely master it. As for the stinging hex, Harry doesn't think he can learn it in such a short period of time. So he plans to just take a look and understand it. There is no need to specifically cram for this spell before the game. Thank you so much. After knowing what he should do next, Harry quickly thanked Hugo and the others from the bottom of his heart, stood up from the table, and prepared to go to Professor Flitwick for advice. But just as he turned around and was about to leave, he turned back abruptly and said to Hugo and the others in a low voice, you better pay attention to Karkaroff. Sirius said he was a Death Eater back then. Thanks, Hugo nodded with a smile as a response. Of course he knew that Karkaroff was a Death Eater, but Karkaroff, as a traitor to the Death Eaters, should be one of the few people who least wanted Voldemort to return. However, it can also be seen from this point that Harry's heart is indeed kind enough, so he can share this kind of important information with Veneto and the others at this time. How is your competition preparation going? When the charms class ended in the afternoon, Professor Flitwick stopped Veneto, who was about to go out with Hugo, and asked with concern, don't worry, Professor, I'm ready. Veneto looked at Professor Flitwick seriously and said, I can be sure that I can pass the first project. That's good, that's good. Professor Flitwick nodded with a smile. He knew that Veneto was not the kind of person who talks nonsense, so when she said this, it meant that she was at least 90% sure. After thanking Professor Flitwick for his concern, Veneto and Hugo returned to the Ravenclaw common room together, and then discussed some details of the competition on Tuesday. I will consider the psychological endurance of the surrounding students, Veneto promised in a low voice. And I can also be sure that if something really goes wrong, I also have enough confidence to control the situation without killing the dragon. This point is indeed better than me. Hermione nodded slightly and said, if I want to control this scene, I may only have the option of killing the dragon. The reason for this situation is because the difference between ship girls and ship girls is also very large. As a top battleship ship girl, Veneto is obviously much stronger than Hermione, a light cruiser ship girl. Therefore, for Veneto, a giant dragon that can be easily killed may require Hermione to make certain preparations to do this. But no matter what, the next battle is not a very difficult thing for Veneto. So in the few days before the game, Hugo and the others spent a very relaxing few days, and by the way, they made all kinds of preparations. Chapter 334 Start. The day of the competition arrived quickly, and although Hugo really wanted to complain about having normal classes in the morning before an afternoon competition, thankfully it was just History of Magic class, which gave Veneto and the others enough time to go over the details of the afternoon's competition again. To rehearse because Quidditch had been cancelled this year, the students of Hogwarts poured their enthusiasm into the Triwizard Tournament. Even though school was still in session in the morning, it didn't diminish everyone's enthusiasm at all. By noon, all the students' attention was focused on the competition that was about to begin in the afternoon. After lunch, the great hall quickly filled with the noisy voices of the students. Of course, this commotion had nothing to do with Veneto, because just after lunch, Professor McGonagall came over and asked Veneto to go to the competition arena ahead of time. Veneto, Potter, the champions must go down to the arena now. You must be prepared to complete the first task. Okay, Harry said, standing up, his fork falling into his plate with a clatter. Wish you all the best, Hugo said, hugging Veneto, who gracefully put down her cutlery, amidst the whistles and cheers of a group of classmates, and then watched her leave the classroom with McGonagall to the applause of everyone. Professor McGonagall looked a little distraught, which was understandable. After all, seeing her students face dragons, most normal teachers would be worried about their students, especially since Harry's level in this area was somewhat questionable. After the two contestants left, everyone stayed in the restaurant for another 7 or 8 minutes, and then crowded together and walked towards the competition venue. By the time Hugo and the others arrived at the competition venue, many students were already seated. This was a structure similar to an ancient Roman Colosseum, and the arena for the competition was on the ground in the center of a circle of stands. The arena in the middle of the seats was not flat ground, but a terrain temporarily constructed with magic. Like the wilderness, this kind of terrain looked like a mountainous area, which, when combined with dragons, would create a better viewing experience. At the same time, the rugged terrain would also make it easier to showcase the competitors' abilities. After finding a place to sit down, Hugo and Hermione immediately contacted Veneto through the Admiral network, and then saw the situation inside the tent through her eyes. At this time, Bagman had just entered the tent and was encouraging the champions with some words. However, possibly because his thinking was different from normal people, the encouragement effect was very average. For example, this uncle actually said something like "make yourself at home," for the contestants who already knew they would be facing dragons next. This kind of talk would only fill everyone with the urge to complain, because even wizards don't keep fire-breathing dragons at home. Okay, very happy that everyone is here now. Hope I'm not too late. It's time to explain the situation to you, Bagman said cheerfully. After the audience gathers, I will pass this bag around to each of you. He held up a purple silk bag and shook it at all the champions. You will pick out a small model of the thing you will each face. They have different, species. I also have one more thing to tell you, Your task is to retrieve the golden egg. His words were disjointed, but the champions sitting here now all knew what he was talking about, crossing the fire-breathing dragon and obtaining the golden egg. However, everyone couldn't show that they understood this matter, because theoretically they shouldn't know this information in advance, so the scene was slightly awkward. It was also at this time that Hugo and Hermione noticed that the people around them had gathered, especially the students from the other two schools, who had all lined up and entered the arena. I think the time is almost here. Hugo raised his arm and looked at the time on his wristwatch, and then said, Next, we'll have to see if Veneto draws lots early or late. Veneto had said before that she wanted to fight that most powerful Hungarian Hortentail. After all, since she had chosen to come out to compete, she naturally hoped to leave a deep impression on everyone. After all, in future wars, there would always need to be someone who could unite the students in Hogwarts. Originally, Hugo had hoped to do it himself, but the shipgirls felt that if the Admiral had to worry about everything, then their existence would not be of much significance. Unlike ordinary humans, the shipgirls' hands were able to feel the most subtle differences on those models, so as long as Veneto touched them, she would basically be able to feel the dragon she wanted. Ladies first. At this time, Ludo Bagman in the tent first looked at the pocket watch he was carrying, and after looking at it, untied the purple cloth bag, and then handed it to Fleur Delacour. In fact, under normal circumstances, he should have handed it to the younger Veneto first. But Fleur's Vila bloodline was too attractive to men. Fleur put a trembling hand into the bag and took out a small, lifelike dragon model. It was a Welsh green, with a number tied around its neck. Fleur looked relieved, and Veneto also breathed a sigh of relief in her heart at the same time, then stepped forward and gently touched the model inside that looked the most rough and took it out. Hiss! When the others saw the model of the small dragon in Veneto's open palm, they all gasped, because this represented that the smallest contestant on the field was facing the most powerful dragon at the moment. Don't worry, these are all pretty easy guys to deal with, Veneto said with a smile to the few people who were looking at her with concern, while teasing the small dragon model in her hand. Seeing her so calm, Harry obviously became a lot calmer as well, and drew a model of a Swedish short snout from the bag. while Chrome got a Chinese fireball. Okay, you've all got them, Bagman said after seeing that all the contestants present had finished drawing lots. You've all drawn the fire-breathing dragon you're going to face, and the number on its neck is the order in which you'll deal with the dragon. Understand? Now, I'm going to leave you for a while, because I'm going to commentate for the audience. Fleur, you're first, and you go into that arena as soon as you hear the whistle. Got it? Now, Harry, I want to say a few words to you before the competition. The others prepare here. Harry, you come outside with me. Bagman doesn't owe money this time, does he? Why do I feel like he's gambling again? Seeing Bagman take Harry out, Veneto quickly asked Hugo through the Admiral network. You have to know, for these gambling addicts, whether they win or lose, they will keep gambling until they lose everything one day. Hugo was very clear about this situation. Something like the Triwizard Tournament is as attractive to a gambler as a delicious meal is to a gourmand, so a gambling addict like Bagman will definitely not let go of such an opportunity. Welcome everyone to watch the first match of the Triwizard Tournament. After a preparatory whistle, Bagman rushed to the podium from the side of the tent, panting, and then cast a sonorous charm on his throat and said loudly, Chapter 335 Dragon Fight. Our first task is dragons. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our first contestant, Fleur Delacour from Buttons. After a brief 5-minute introduction, the dragon handlers finally secured the Welsh green dragon in the arena. Seeing this, Bagman immediately announced the start of the competition instantly. Cheers erupted like a volcano, with everyone waving their hands and shouting loudly. Amidst this fervent atmosphere, Fleur stepped into the arena, already occupied by a fire-breathing dragon having been abruptly moved from the darkness of its cage into the sunlit arena. Coupled with the stimulation from the surrounding audience, the Welsh green dragon suddenly raised its head and spewed a jet of flame into the sky, followed by a roar. Witnessing this, more than a dozen professional dragon handlers, seated behind several giant rock formations below the arena, gripped their wands tightly, ready to respond to any unexpected situation. The visual contrast between a delicate beauty and a giant dragon was striking, especially when the dragon breathed fire. Several younger students even gasped and covered their faces with their hands. Upon entering the arena, Fleur didn't approach the dragon directly. Instead, she stood outside the dragons, waving her wand and chanting a spell. At first, nothing seemed to happen, but as time passed, the dragon began to sway slightly, and the frequency of its blinks noticeably increased. This is a form of ritual magic, a special spellcasting method derived from alchemy. It gradually accumulates magical power on the target through a relatively long magical ritual. Watching Fleur confront the dragon and cast her spell, Hugo quickly recognized the type of magic being used and explained it to his sister beside him. The biggest advantage of this magic is that it allows you to complete spells beyond your current level by expending a significant amount of time or even spellcasting materials when your strength is insufficient. However, the disadvantage is also obvious. The preparation process for the entire spell is too long. It's relatively useful for dealing with magical creatures or conducting experiments, but in wizarding duels, it's basically making yourself a sitting duck. Although ritual magic greatly amplified Fleur's magical power, the dragon's naturally strong magical defenses still proved effective. After more than 10 minutes of effort, the dragon finally lay down quietly and fell asleep. Seeing this, the surrounding audience quieted down, and only Bagman's deliberately lowered voice could be heard. Now, our contestant Miss Delacour has used magic to put the dragon to sleep. Seeing the dragon opposite her asleep, Fleur lowered her wand and breathed a sigh of relief. Even though she had mastered this opportunistic ritual magic, it still placed a severe strain on her. Then, holding her breath and concentrating, she approached the sleeping Welsh green dragon with light but swift steps. Using the rocks on the ground as cover in less than 30 seconds, Fleur appeared beside the green dragon, and with a small spell, she gently lifted the dragon's left foreclaw, revealing a nest of eggs underneath. As she bent down to retrieve the golden egg from the nest, Fleur unconsciously breathed a sigh of relief. But then, she didn't notice the dragon's eyes twitching slightly in the distance before suddenly snapping open. Careful! Both the audience in the stands and Ludo Bagman on the platform shouted in alarm. Hearing the shouts, Fleur instinctively rolled forward. This roll proved to be extremely timely, because less than a second after she left her original position, a ball of fire engulfed the spot where she had just been standing. However, even so, a piece of Fleur's skirt was burned off. And as Fleur urgently conjured a jet of water from her wand to extinguish the flames, the Welsh green dragon took a deep breath. For a mother dragon incubating eggs, witnessing the supposed theft of its golden egg under the effects of the Confundus charm would naturally incite rage. preparing to unleash a massive burst of flame to incinerate the thief. Fortunately, Fleur had already obtained the golden egg, so the dragon handlers outside the arena immediately rushed in, using multiple layers of shield charms to block the mother dragon's furious attack, followed by a rain of stupefy charms to knock out the Welsh green dragon. At this moment, Fleur seemed to be trembling slightly. After all, she had first expended a great deal of energy casting magic, and then narrowly escaped death. Even a carefully selected contestant wouldn't be completely calm at this moment. Soon, Madame Maxime came out and draped a blanket over the soaking Fleur, who then left the arena. Simultaneously, the stunned Welsh green dragon was also removed from the arena. It seems there's a reason why dragons are classified as level 5x beasts, Hugo mused, watching a group of wizards clear the arena and bring in a new dragon. If Hogwarts professors were to encounter a dragon one-on-one, they should be able to escape unscathed. But defeating a dragon isn't something every professor can do. The heads of the 4 houses and Headmaster Dumbledore should be fine, but it's hard to say about the other professors. At the very least, Professor Trelawney, the divination professor, most likely wouldn't be able to defeat a dragon in a one-on-one fight. Just as Hugo was contemplating the specific strengths of Hogwarts professors, who were considered top-tier combatants in the wizarding world, the arena was cleared, a whistle blew, and Harry walked out. Although Harry initially appeared a bit nervous, he quickly calmed down and summoned his firebolt broom with a summoning charm. As the broom flew into the arena from outside, Harry immediately gripped the firebolt tightly in his hand, mounted it, and charged towards the Swedish short-snout dragon. Amidst the gasps of the crowd, this provocation naturally enraged the Swedish short-snout, and the blue dragon continuously spewed jets of flame, attempting to knock down this annoying fly. Unfortunately, as the youngest seeker in Hogwarts in nearly a century, Harry's agility on a broom far exceeded what the dragon could achieve. All the flames missed their mark. Dragons are not very patient creatures, especially mother dragons protecting their nests. So, after only provoking it for 2 or 3 minutes, the dragon stood on its hind legs, attempting to fly up and eliminate Harry. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Harry quickly swooped down and flew close to the ground, into the dragon's blind spot. Then, before the dragon could react, he dodged the descending wing and quickly snatched the golden egg from the nest. By the time the dragon reacted, Harry had already flown out of the dragon's range with a golden egg. Amidst the cheers of the audience, the dragon handlers rushed in to deal with the situation. Excellent. The Hogwarts contestant completed the first task in just 5 minutes, Ludo Bagman exclaimed excitedly. This breaks the record for the fastest completion time in the first task since the 17th century. Chapter 336 Victory. It has to be said that Harry's quick victory put a lot of pressure on Krum. As a famous Quidditch superstar, he had an image to maintain. With Harry's brilliance preceding him, even a clear victory wouldn't be enough. His score would still look bad in comparison. At the start, Krum considered using some special magic to make his victory more impressive, but in the end, he decided to abandon the idea. As the star player who could decisively catch the golden snitch in the World Cup even when his team was destined to lose, Krum knew that the most important thing for him now was to complete the task. Taking risks and complicating things was obviously not worthwhile, so, in the subsequent match, Krum followed his original plan, using the conjunctivitis curse to blind the dragon, and then seized the golden egg while the dragon was in chaos. However, the dragon handlers who came to clean up the mess looked very unhappy, because the dragon had crushed half of the dragon eggs while struggling. It seems that Krum's score won't be high, Hermione said, looking at the dragon handlers who were using various tools to collect the remaining egg liquid in shells. Destroying dragon eggs will definitely result in deductions. Krum was clearly aware of this as well, so he looked equally unhappy as he left the arena with a golden egg, looking rather dejected. Alright, let's welcome the last champion. After the arena was rearranged, Bagman cleared his throat and said loudly. The audience on the field all looked towards the entrance of the enclosure, where a silver-haired little witch wearing Hogwarts school uniform was walking in. Unlike the other champions, the witch's expression was very calm, seemingly unaffected by the roaring Hungarian hotel in front of her. In an instant, applause and cheers rang out in the arena. Compared to Harry Potter, Venato's previous feat of shattering the ground with a punch had left a deep impression on everyone. Many firmly believed that she was the true champion of Hogwarts. After entering the arena, Venato first waved to the audience as a greeting. Then, using her wand, she cut a palm-sized piece of cloth from the peach tree, turned it into a red handkerchief, and wrapped a stone she picked up from the ground inside. The fourth champion's opponent is a Hungarian horntail, the largest and most terrifying of these dragons. Let's see how our smallest champion will face this fearsome dragon. At this moment, Bagman began the pre-match introduction as usual, but he didn't see Veneto suddenly turn her head to look at the garrulous Bagman standing on the podium when he said the word smallest. Because the ship girls' birthdays are often their launch dates, Veneto's birthday is July 25th, while Harry's birthday is July 31st. That is to say, Harry is the smallest one. The reason Bagman said Veneto was the smallest contestant was probably because he thought Veneto looked more petite and cute. But this sentence obviously touched on Veneto's sensitive point. Fortunately, Bagman was just making a habitual slip of the tongue, which could barely be considered unintentional. So Veneto just glared at him and then looked at the dragon in the arena. Alright, let the competition begin now. Bagman, unaware of what had just happened, felt a chill run down his back, so he subconsciously stopped his explanation and announced the start of the competition. Now, let the games begin. Just after the starting whistle sounded, Veneto said in a doll-like voice devoid of any emotion, and then threw the handkerchief holding a stone in the middle into the sky. The handkerchief flew straight into the sky, and then grew larger and larger. In an instant, both the audience in the arena and the dragon focused their attention on the handkerchief. A clever move, Bagman shouted from the stands. Using a handkerchief to distract the dragon is a very good idea, but the time it can buy won't be. What is that? Bagman's voice changed, because he saw that in just a few seconds, the petite silver-haired girl had rushed to the dragon's side, wielding an iron rod that had just been conjured, 90 high explosive cannon barrel. Looking at the steel rod that was more than 4 meters long, Hugo instantly recognized what Veneto had created. This cannon barrel probably weighed more than a ton, but in Veneto's hands, it looked as light as a toothpick. He saw her grab the muzzle and swing it with all her might, and the thicker part of the cannon at the rear happened to smash into the Hungarian Hardtail's face, which had just reacted and was about to stick its head out to see what was going on after taking such a heavy blow. Even the dragon was momentarily stunned. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Veneto grabbed the cannon barrel and swung it hard in the opposite direction, hitting the Hungarian Hardtail on the neck. This blow was even more damaging to the dragon than the previous one, because the Hardtail was just about to breathe fire at the little bug in its eyes, but Veneto's blow caused a mouthful of dragon fire to explode directly in its throat. After being blasted by its own dragon fire, the Hungarian Hardtail suddenly woke up from its previous rage, and immediately felt the extremely dangerous aura emanating from Veneto. Realizing this, the Hungarian Hardtail's brain, already dizzy from the beating, was filled with fear, and it frantically opened its wings, trying to escape. But this action immediately became a symbol of the opponent's desire to continue fighting in Veneto's eyes. So, Veneto, looking a little impatient, quickly jumped up and swung the cannon barrel, repeatedly striking the place where the dragon's neck and body connected. After quickly striking the same spot 3 times in 2 seconds, a terrible sound of bone breaking came from the dragon's neck, and at the same time, the skin of the entire neck collapsed. A broken cervical vertebra is also a devastating injury for a dragon, because its throat had been severely damaged by the backfire of the unreleased flames, so the Hungarian Hardtail fell to the ground without a sound. This behemoth leaned crookedly against the protective wall, lying there motionless with its abdomen facing the sky. Blood was constantly seeping out from its wounds, nostrils, corners of its mouth, and eyes, making the hideous dragon head look like it had turned red. At this moment, Veneto walked gracefully to the temporary nest, took out the golden dragon egg from among the gray dragon eggs that looked like rocks, and held it high. Cheers and applause rang out in the arena at this moment, because Veneto's movements were so fast that the audience only realized that the competition was over. Look, our 14-year-old contestant has completed the competition with absolute overwhelming power. She succeeded, Bagman's excited voice echoed throughout the arena, and Miss Veneto also broke the fastest victory record in the first match of the Triwizard tournament just set by Harry. Interestingly, the fastest to complete the competition are now the 2 youngest contestants. The moment Veneto knocked down the dragon, Hugo pulled his sister down the stairs on the side of the stands to welcome Veneto, who had completed the competition. Chapter 337. The first game is over. Just as Hugo and the others rushed down the stands to meet Veneto, they saw a large group of dragon trainers quickly passing through the tunnels beneath the stands and heading towards the center of the arena. After all, Veneto's attacks just now could be considered serious injuries for the dragon, so now that the competition is over, these dragon trainers need to rescue the unfortunate Hungarian Hardtail as soon as possible. When Hugo and the Weasley siblings entered the tent, they found that many people were already there. Madame Pomfrey was busily checking the contestants' bodies, while the professors and the headmaster were each talking to their students. The most seriously injured was Fleur Delacour. Both of her legs had obvious burns. If it weren't for the powerful potions of the magical world, she would likely have scars on her legs. Crum's injuries were slightly better than Fleur's. He only had a few bruises and abrasions caused by the rocks thrown up by the dragon's struggles. At this time, he was stoically letting Madame Pomfrey apply medicine to his bare chest. Although Harry and Veneto were the youngest two on the field, their condition was obviously much better. Harry's clothes were just a bit wrinkled, while Veneto looked almost no different from before the match. "Veneto, I must say, you were a bit too harsh just now," Professor Flitwick said in his high-pitched voice. "At least, given your level of strength, you could have solved the match with less violence." "You're right, Professor Flitwick," Veneto said somewhat helplessly. "Now that I think about it, the dragon should have been preparing to escape when it spread its wings, but I was too nervous at the time. I thought the dragon was spreading its wings to fight back, so I hit it a few more times in a hurry. I didn't expect the dragon's body to be so much more fragile than I imagined." "All right. But you'd better pay attention next time," Professor Flitwick said, shaking his head helplessly. After all, Veneto grew up in the Muggle world, so it's completely understandable that he doesn't know much about dragons. Just then, the group of dragon trainers carried the injured dragon away from the front of the tent using magic, arguing loudly among themselves. "Fractured 7th, 8th, and 9th cervical vertebrae, ruptured carotid artery, ruptured trachea, insufficient blood supply to the brain. We need to quickly reconstruct these organs and inject the dragon with blood-replenishing potions, otherwise the dragon will suffer brain death." After hearing this, both Fleur and Krum looked at Veneto with a look of fear. They had all grown up in the wizarding world, so they naturally knew how terrifying it was to be able to kill a dragon in hand-to-hand combat. "All right, the judges are about to score," Professor McGonagall said. "A slight difference from the original competition process is that everyone is now scoring together after the competition is over. This point was proposed by Ki Yi. She told Headmaster Dumbledore that if a score was given after each game, it would be obviously disadvantageous to the contestants who appeared later because the order of the first game was determined by drawing lots, and no one knew who would go first. The headmasters of the three schools agreed with Ki Yi's point of view in this situation. The scoring order was based on the order of appearance, so Fleur, Krum, and Harry respectively obtained scores of 37, 35, and 40. In fact, these people's scores could have been higher, but unfortunately, Karkaroff was deliberately suppressing the scores of students from other schools, so everyone's scores were not high. Veneto's score was revealed last, and she received the same score as Fleur. 37. This was mainly because she had injured the dragon a little too severely. According to the conversation Hugo heard from the dragon trainers, the Hungarian Hortail would need at least half a year to recover after returning. On the one hand, the dragon's injuries were indeed serious, and on the other hand, the dragon's magical defense was too strong. This powerful defense is indeed conducive to the dragon resisting various magical attacks, but the tragic aspect is that when injured or sick, the magical treatment methods that can be used also become extremely limited. "You all did a great job," Ludo Bagman said, jumping into the tent cheerfully after finishing the scoring, looking as if he himself had successfully crossed a fire-breathing dragon. After hearing Ludo Bagman's words, everyone looked up at him. Only then did Hugo notice that one side of Fleur's face was covered with a thick layer of orange ointment. Although she had narrowly avoided the dragon's direct fire breath just now, the scorching dragon breath still burned the skin exposed outside her clothes. "Okay, I only have a few words to say. The second task will begin at 9:30 a.m. on February 24th next year. Before that, you can rest for a long time," Bagman said, after seeing that everyone's attention was focused on him. "However, we need to leave some questions for you to consider. If you look down at the golden eggs you are holding, you will find that they can be opened. See the seam there? You must unravel the clues provided in the egg. That will tell you what the second task is, and you can prepare for it. Is everything clear? No questions? Okay, you can go. Thank you for your reminders," Harry said sincerely to Hugo and the others after everyone had left the tent and found that there was no one around. "If it weren't for you, I really wouldn't know what to do in today's competition. We actually did very little," Hugo said with a smile, shaking his head. "You know, we just gave you some reminders. Even without our reminders, I believe you would have been able to complete the competition, but if you don't prepare in advance, I think these dragons are not something that can be easily dealt with," Ron said, following Harry's side. "Moreover, judging from this competition, I can basically confirm that the person who put Harry's name into the Goblet of Fire probably didn't just want to play a prank. He's likely planning to kill Harry. Think about it, There are 3 tasks in the entire competition. The first task is already fighting a dragon, so the other 2 tasks are likely to be even more dangerous. The group said goodbye at the entrance of the castle. Harry and Ron hurried towards the gallery, obviously hoping to write to Sirius Black as soon as possible to tell him about their experience. Hugo and the other 3 went straight to Ravenclaw Tower. After all, now that the competition is over, everyone should get together and relax a little. Things were just as they had imagined. When Veneto walked into the Ravenclaw common room, bursts of cheers erupted inside, and the tables were piled high with all kinds of snacks according to Ner. These snacks were made by the house elves in the school after the prefect found Professor Flitwick, the head of the house. In terms of making snacks, the house elves' level is not much worse than that of Honeyduk's sweet shop, but the house elves in the school generally don't make sweets except for important banquets, unless they get permission from the professor. Like today when Veneto, the protagonist, entered the room, the celebration immediately began. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338 End in Course. After receiving Veneto's permission, many interested students stepped forward and picked up the golden egg, tossing it in their hands. To the surprise of many, the golden egg was not much lighter than a real dragon egg. This thing is quite heavy, Marietta said, holding the dragon egg with both hands, then looked at the circle of grooves on the golden egg. It seems this egg can be opened. Veneto, do you know what's inside this egg? I haven't had time to open it yet, Veneto said, eating a piece of chocolate. Whoever wants to open it can open it, but it's best to take some precautions before opening it. Don't worry, we're not those impulsive lions. Michael Corner placed the golden egg passed to him on the mantelpiece, and then several older students stepped forward and cast several defensive spells on the golden egg. Then, the new Ravenclaw Quidditch team captain, Davis, put on dragon hide gloves, stepped forward, put his fingers into the circle of grooves, and pried it open with force. The golden egg was much easier to open than expected, so with a gentle pry, the golden egg was opened, revealing its contents to everyone present. The golden egg was empty, there was nothing inside, but at the moment it was opened, an extremely terrifying shrill scream filled the entire room. Close it quickly, several Ravenclaw students shouted simultaneously, covering their ears with their hands. Fortunately, Davis was relatively good at dealing with such situations, so he quickly closed the golden egg as soon as it screamed, silencing the room again. It's just an ordinary sound, Penelope, who had become the head girl this year, said. Because the magic we set up around the golden egg hasn't changed at all, so I think these sounds should be clues, containing information about the next task. It's just that the contestants must solve the mysteries within to obtain the information the sound wants to convey. You're right, Veneto said, wiping the chocolate marks on his hands with a handkerchief. We can even narrow down the scope a bit. For example, this scream is actually a language. After determining the direction, solving the problem next would require a slow and steady effort, and it wouldn't be possible to figure out the result in a short time. So everyone quickly relaxed completely and began to celebrate Veneto's victory in the first task in the common room, until 12:30 a.m. when the celebration finally ended. December brought gales and sleet to Hogwarts. Although there were always drafts in the castle in winter, compared to those living in the Durmstrang shipyard on the lake, the castle's warm fireplaces and thick walls obviously seemed safer. The large ship swayed and rocked in the gale, its black sails fluttering in the dark night sky. Considering that the huge Hogwarts hadn't even managed to heat all areas, the Durmstrang's dwelling, like a mobile home, obviously had a worse living environment. Hagrid had been busy providing Madame Maxime's steeds with their favorite single malt whiskey, keeping them spirited even on snowy days. Therefore, a scent of alcohol wafted from the corner of the temporary stable, making the care of magical creatures students a little dizzy. Despite this, everyone still needed to perk up and take care of those blast-ended scroots that didn't look like good news, even though Hagrid had separated them in advance. The blast-ended scroots' cannibalistic nature meant that only 15 remained now. These terrifying creatures were each nearly 6 feet long, with thick gray armor, wildly flailing powerful legs, constantly exploding and spitting fire tails, and their stingers and suckers. All of this combined to make the blast-ended scroots the most disgusting thing this group of wizards had ever seen since birth. Without exception, the reason everyone gathered on the training grounds today was because Hagrid thought these blast-ended scroots might need to hibernate, so he wanted everyone to study how this creature should hibernate. Didn't the Gryffindor students try it this morning? They said that this creature not only doesn't hibernate, but also hates being stuffed into some sealed space by others. A Ravenclaw student suddenly said, "Ah, you're right." Hagrid nodded and said, "But after studying it, I thought that maybe my method was wrong, so I planned to try another method." Hagrid's new method was to have everyone dig pits in the open space around his house, then put the blast-ended scroots at the bottom of the pits and loosely cover them with a layer of soil. For most people, this task was obviously much easier than stuffing the blast-ended scroots into boxes covered with blankets and pillows, especially with the help of magic. Digging pits was a very easy task, so in just 10 minutes, everyone dug a large pile of pits as big as wells, deeper than people, then threw the blast-ended scroots in and desperately covered them with soil. The blast-ended scroots didn't seem to like being treated this way either, but after entering the earthen pits, the blast-ended scroots were completely restricted, and neither the flames nor the stingers on their bodies could hurt the wizards who came to class. "Wait, everyone stop!" Seeing a group of students happily patting flat the mounds of dirt arched up by the blast-ended scroots with shovels, Hagrid quickly waved his hand to stop everyone, then dug out the blast-ended scroots. It must be said that the blast-ended scroots were thick-skinned enough, and even after being buried for more than 10 minutes, most of them were still hopping around. As long as they stopped patting with shovels, they could climb out by themselves after lifting the soil on their bodies. The only exceptions were the 2 earthen pits that Veneto had patted earlier. The 2 blast-ended scroots inside seemed a little listless, but there was no visible problem on the outside, so in the rest of the class, Hagrid admitted that his plan to hibernate the blast-ended scroots didn't work, then put away these little monsters and took out several fire crabs that he had used when cultivating blast-ended scroots for everyone to explain. Compared to the ugly, smelly, and very fond of attacking people blast-ended scroots, the fire crabs, although their butts also spit fire, were much better tempered than the blast-ended scroots, at least compared to those blast-ended scroots that would inexplicably spit out flames. Everything about the fire crabs had a precursor, and there would be no problem of being burned without warning. What's more, although fire crabs are actually called crabs, they look like sea turtles, and their shells are inlaid with jewels. Their appearance is several levels higher than that of blast-ended scroots. While everyone was surrounding the fire crabs to observe, Hagrid approached Hugo and the others and talked about Rita Skeeter's interview in the Gryffindor and Slytherin classes this morning. "Hagrid, you shouldn't have treated Rita like that." After listening to Hagrid's description of the whole process, Hermione frowned and said nervously, "After all, she has no moral bottom line, and there are many people willing to read what she writes, so she is very likely to dig up some secrets from you, and then embellish them. At that time, I am worried that you may encounter the situation that has recently happened to Harry." Chapter 339 Dance Notice. Although Hugo and Hermione both reminded Hagrid, Hagrid clearly didn't take this matter to heart. At least, he didn't think Rita Skeeter could do anything to him for a period. Most people's mood seemed much better than before. Not to mention Veneto becoming a star at school, with people discussing her last match wherever she went. Even Harry's popularity rose more than one level at least. In that Triwizard Tournament Dragon Challenge, almost all the students admitted that Harry was indeed a qualified champion, and also believed that the person who put Harry's name in the Goblet of Fire probably wanted to kill him. The only thing that made everyone feel uncomfortable was the elusive Rita Skeeter. Although Headmaster Dumbledore had forbidden her from entering the school, students would occasionally see her figure. However, soon, everyone stopped paying attention to Rita scurrying around in recent days, because around mid-December, news about the Yule Ball began to spread throughout the school. After Charms class ended that day, Professor Flitwick kept all the Ravenclaw students behind after class, and then earnestly conveyed the news to everyone. "The ball is a tradition of the Triwizard Tournament, and also an opportunity for us to enhance our relationship and friendly exchange with foreign guests. All fourth-year and above students can participate. As for those lower-grade students, if a senior student is willing to invite you, you can also participate in this Yule Ball as a dance partner." The students below the stage instantly became lively. For these young wizards in their adolescence, the ball was definitely a highly anticipated event. Many boys began to stir, while the girls chattered about topics related to ball attire. "You will need to wear your dress robes," Professor Flitwick said with a smile after letting everyone discuss for a while. "The ball will be held in the Great Hall at 8 o'clock on Christmas night, and will end at 12 o'clock midnight. Also, Vittorio Veneto, as Hogwarts champion and the pride of our Ravenclaw house, you need to dance the opening dance with your partner." Hearing this, Veneto nodded to Professor Flitwick amidst the envious gazes of everyone. When it came to dancing, the ship girls could proudly say they were professionals, so she wasn't worried about this news about the Christmas ball spread throughout the castle like wind. and almost all Hogwarts students were mobilized, especially the girls. The girls giggled and whispered in the corridors, squealing with laughter whenever a boy passed by, excitedly exchanging ideas and discussing what clothes they would wear on Christmas night. Among so many people, the most popular were naturally the 4 contestants, especially the 2 foreign students. Krum was always followed by a large group of girls, while many boys initiated attempts with flirts for the 2 Hogwarts champions. The situation was different. Harry was single-mindedly focused on inviting Ravenclaw's Cho Chang, so he rejected several girls who took the initiative to invite him, and no one came to invite Veneto. One reason for this situation was that everyone knew the relationship between Veneto and Hugo, so the students of this school were generally unwilling to make fools of themselves at this time. Another reason was that although Veneto's appearance was considered top-notch among Hogwarts students, she looked a little too young. So many people were worried that inviting Veneto would cause others to question whether there was something wrong with them. However, somewhat unexpectedly, although Hugo invited Veneto at the first moment, he was directly rejected by Veneto. And the reason for this made Hugo feel speechless. Of course, I hoped to attend the ball with the Admiral, but it shouldn't be the ball at Hogwarts, Veneto said in the room of requirement. Otherwise, it would be unfair to the other sisters, so I think after the Christmas ball, we can all get together and find a chance to hold our own ball. At that time, Admiral, you can dance with whoever you want, of course. Another reason Veneto didn't say was that the dance partner at the Christmas ball was likely to be the hostage in the next match. As ship girls, they couldn't allow their Admiral to run underwater alone. For Hugo, this was a tragic event of too many cooks spoil the broth, but fortunately, there was still some time before the ball. As the youngest recipient of the Order of Merlin, he didn't think he would be so miserable that he couldn't find a dance partner. Moreover, he also had a lot of problems related to what Massachusetts and the others encountered in the American wizarding world that needed to be dealt with, because as the ship girl's power expanded, all kinds of unexpected things would happen. For example, Salem accidentally discovered a dangerous organization composed of squibs and ordinary people not long after school started this year. As a result, after directly transforming and swallowing that organization, he discovered that this organization was called the Third Salem. That's right, this organization was composed of the descendants of those scourers in America. Although the Second Salem organization was completely destroyed during Grindelwald's era, this organization has re-emerged in the last 10 years. However, unlike the Second Salem, due to the changes of the times, most of the outer members, except for a very small number of core members, were just conspiracy theorists or novelty seekers. After all, for ordinary people born in the ordinary human world in the 1970s and 1980s, a series of cultural products such as the Lord of the Rings and D&D series tabletop games made it difficult for people to have a strong sense of aversion to magic or wizards. Even many people in the new Third Salem organization believe that magic is a very cool thing. And it is very interesting to trace the traces of magic. The Third Salem had no way to deal with this trend. Unless they were those pure rednecks who usually didn't have much contact with the outside world, it would be difficult to cultivate hatred for wizards and magic. So now the Third Salem has changed its tactics. They use interest groups or hobbyist associations as cover to recruit a large number of peripheral personnel to serve them, while the core personnel are responsible for various attacks. Because of this organizational structure, the ship girls were able to take over this organization almost completely in a very short period of time. They only needed to reveal the facts of the organization to all members, and then convert or clean up the core personnel. This is why the American ship girls invited Hugo and them to go to America after the ball, because there were many things about the future development of this organization that needed to be discussed. Of course, taking this opportunity, the ship girls would also get together and hold some balls or parties to relax. Although specific matters could only be dealt with in America, there were still many things that could be dealt with directly through the Admiral Network. Therefore, Hugo naturally spent a lot of time dealing with these matters in this way. When Hugo finished all the things and began to consider a dance partner for the Christmas ball, there was only a little more than a week left before the Christmas ball. After a simple inquiry, Hugo found that at least half of the people had already found dance partners, including his sister Hermione. It's just that Hermione didn't tell Hugo who her dance partner was. Chapter 340. Before Christmas. The last week of the semester arrived quickly. Although the temperature outside the school was getting colder, the castle was noticeably more restless than before. The air was thick with a sour stench of romance, and walking through the castle, one could often see pairs of witches and wizards together, while the rest were actively discussing the Christmas ball. Rumors about the Christmas ball were spreading everywhere, but most students didn't believe them. For example, The rumor that Dumbledore bought 800 barrels of honey-flavored mead from Rosmerta at the Three Broomsticks was not very credible, because the alcohol content of this drink was quite high, and most of the ball's participants were not yet of age. However, the rumor that he had booked the Weird Sisters might be true. Many young wizards born into wizarding families were excitedly recommending this musical group to wizards who didn't know about them because the holiday was approaching. The professors reacted differently. For example, Professor Flitwick or Professor Sprout would finish their lectures in the shortest possible time and then leave the remaining time for students to do as they pleased, especially Professor Flitwick, who specifically called Venetia over during the free time to discuss various matters related to the competition from the first year. Professor Flitwick had been quite concerned about Venetia. On the one hand, in Ravenclaw, a house that values knowledge, excellent students are naturally more likely to gain attention, but more importantly, since Venetia tore apart the troll in her first year, Professor Flitwick felt that Venetia, like himself, was a wizard with other creatures' blood mixed in. In this empathetic situation, he would naturally care more about Venetia. However, not every professor was so tolerant. For example, Professor Binns's attention could not be diverted by anything. He continued to trudge through his pile of Goblin Rebellion notes. This was not unexpected. After all, even death could not stop this professor's teaching career, so a mere Christmas ball would certainly not affect his teaching career. Professor Moody and Professor McGonagall naturally wouldn't relax for a second. They would talk from beginning to end throughout the entire class, not giving anyone a chance to slack off. Professor Snape, needless to say, publicly announced that he would test everyone's antidote in the last class with a practical test, and might even draw students to drink the potion directly. Although everyone analyzed from a rational perspective and didn't think that Snape would embarrass Hogwarts students at such a critical moment, his reputation made everyone dare not be 100% sure about this. During this time, Venetia's work went very smoothly. She first confirmed that the second task was no different from what she remembered, and then successfully found a dance partner. It's just that Venetia, like Hermione, refused to tell Hugo who her dance partner was. She only said that she wanted to give him a surprise, and he would know when the ball started. In addition to Venetia, Firefly also found her dance partner, a third-year Gryffindor student named Colin Creevey. Because Creevey had helped her with a favor before, she brought Creevey to the ball this time to repay the favor. Harry's plan to invite Cho Chang failed, because Cho Chang was going to attend with her boyfriend, Cedric Diggory, a seventh-year Hufflepuff student. However, under the encouragement of the twins, Harry successfully invited Ron's sister, Ginny, before Neville, which was a great relief. "Congratulations to you then," Hermione said to Harry with a smile while reading in the library that day, although she really didn't like Harry's tendency to be a standard-faced dog. "Actually, this kind of thing is not that difficult, is it?" Speaking of this, Hermione glanced at her younger brother, Hugo. "As long as you are willing to invite someone, you can always get an invitation, sis. Don't worry, your brother really won't be so miserable as to attend the ball alone." Seeing his sister's expression, Hugo immediately understood what his sister was thinking. So, when lunch ended the next day, Hugo waited at the entrance of the dining hall until a blonde figure came bouncing out and he walked up to her. "Good afternoon, Luna." Hugo looked at the girl, who wasn't very pretty, and bowed slightly, extending his hand. "May I invite you to be my partner for the Christmas ball?" The reason why he invited Luna was also very simple, because Luna and Hermione and Venetia were roommates, and they also liked to read. So, apart from the ship Spirit and his sister, Luna was the girl in Hogwarts who interacted with Hugo the most, especially after Hugo and his sister Hermione saved Luna at the Quidditch World Cup this summer. His relationship with Luna turned from acquaintance to ordinary friend, although Luna usually seems a bit abnormal. For Hugo, who can chat with Quincy without barriers, communicating with her is not too difficult after all, compared to Quincy's communication method of expressing thousands of meanings with just one cun. Luna's jumping thinking is really too simple to understand. "Of course I'm willing." Luna grabbed the hem of her robe slightly nervously at this time and did an old-fashioned curtsy, then a smile appeared on her face. "I'm glad you invited me to the ball." Luna's agreement to this matter was also within Hugo's expectations, because both Hermione and Venetia had told him before that Luna was very curious about what the Christmas ball was like, so she hoped to be invited. After settling the problem of the dance partner, Hugo relaxed a lot all of a sudden. Although he felt that this problem shouldn't be a problem, he would definitely lose face if he really couldn't invite a dance partner. As the time drew closer to Christmas, the teachers and students of Hogwarts constantly showed their eagerness to leave a deep impression on the guests from Boxburtons and Durmstrang. They seemed determined to show the best appearance of the castle this Christmas. The school was decorated with lanterns and decorations, and many students said that they had never seen the school decorated so beautifully since they entered the school. The banisters of the marble staircase were hung with never-melting icicles, and the 12 Christmas trees that were usually placed in the Great Hall were decorated with all kinds of small trinkets, from shiny holly berries to live golden owls that kept hooting. The suits of armor inside the castle were all enchanted, and they would sing Christmas carols whenever someone passed by. It's just that Hugo never understood why the wizards' Christmas carols were no different from those outside at this time. There were also fewer people who were unable to invite a dance partner, but it wasn't that there weren't any at all. For example, Ron had not been able to find a dance partner, and Ron almost made a fool of himself. That day at the entrance of the restaurant, Fleur called out to Cedric, preparing to ask him to go to the ball with her, but the mental interference unique to Vila directly hit Ron, who was not far away. Fortunately, Firefly, who had just finished eating and was walking out, happened to see this scene, so she secretly used a stinging hex to wake him up, although the stinging hex, which was a bit too forceful, caused a red swelling about the thickness of 2 fingers to appear on Ron's left arm. He thanked Firefly profusely after returning. After all, compared to making a fool of himself in public, being hit on the arm with a minor jinx was completely acceptable. Chapter 341 Christmas. After the Christmas holidays began, the professors assigned a mountain of homework to the 4th-year students. According to them, the OWL exams were only a little more than a stone's throw away. Of course, most students had absolutely no intention of doing homework. In the week before Christmas, the library was noticeably emptier than before the holidays. It seems like, apart from those 5th and 7th-year students, we're just about the only ones in the library studying, Hugo said quietly to his sister as he was doing his homework in the library that day. After taking a look around, there's nothing we can do about it. We have a ton of things to do in the second half of the Christmas holidays, so we have to cram and finish our homework now, Hermione said, shaking her head helplessly. Actually, several shipgirls had previously offered to help with the homework, but Hermione had refused them all, because she felt that it would be meaningless to have someone else do it. Hugo himself felt that as long as you mastered the knowledge, it didn't matter whether you did the homework or not. However, when his sister was watching him, expressing dissenting opinions was obviously not appropriate. Thanks to Indomitable and the others' previous investments, the Weasley twins' first product, Animal Transformation Biscuits, was successfully produced and sold on consignment at the Golden Harbor General Store. Compared to the single Canary Cream biscuits in the original text, the new product, supported by the shipgirls, obviously had much more variety. Whether it was the types of transformations or the snack styles and tastes used for disguise, they were all unpredictable. As a result, apart from a few students who had mastered certain identification spells, most people were now extremely cautious when accepting snacks offered by other snowflakes. Fluttered down on the castle and grounds. The Boxburton's carriage, pale blue, looked like a frost-covered pumpkin in winter, next to the gingerbread house sprinkled with sugar, which was Hagrid's hut. The Durmstrang ship's hull was covered with a layer of ice, making it smooth and translucent, and the rigging was also dyed with a layer of white frost. Even at lunchtime, the busy house elves prepared a variety of hot stews and sweet puddings for the teachers and students. The food at Hogwarts is too greasy, Fleur said with a frown as she finished lunch and prepared to go out. I won't be able to fit into my dress robes. That's why I think it's pretty good that I've become a ship girl now, Hermione said to Hugo through the Admiral network as she was heading out. At least I don't have to repeatedly choose between delicious food and my weight when I encounter something tasty. Of course, if that transformation hadn't made me interested in the smell of rust and machine oil, I think I might have been more satisfied with the changes in my body. As Christmas approached, Hugo received good news from Massachusetts. That was that one of her previous special research projects had now made a breakthrough. According to her, this breakthrough was unprecedented and could be said to have subverted the foundations of the modern wizarding world. If it were made public, it would cause a shock in the wizarding world. However, like Veneto and Hermione, Massachusetts was also temporarily keeping it a secret from Hugo, saying that they would present it as a gift when Hugo went to the United States for inspection. Now, these little girls are all giving the admirals the runaround, Hugo said, shaking his head helplessly after reading these reports that made him feel a little stuck. Soon, it was Christmas morning. Even though the shipgirls hadn't sent the gifts to the school this year to avoid causing unnecessary suspicion, Hugo still received a considerable number of gifts, piled up in a small heap by the bed. Some of these gifts came from like-minded people he had met during the previous alchemy competition, and many came from friends he had made at school. Among them, The strangest looking one was a large, colorful metal wire-crafted Snargaluff brooch. Without even looking at the tag, he knew that Luna had definitely sent it after going downstairs for breakfast. Hugo and his friends returned to the common room to chat, and they chatted until after lunch before he, his sister, and Veneto went to the courtyard for a snowball fight around 5 p.m. The girls began to return to the castle one after another to dress up, while Veneto and Hermione dragged on until 6:30 before leaving at 7 p.m. It finally got dark, and at this time, the boys gave up on continuing the snowball fight and returned to their respective dormitories to change into their dress robes. Hugo's dress robes were made for him by the ship girls. The overall design was a deep blue robe, which looked a bit like the ornate military dress uniforms of the 18th and 19th centuries. When he put it on, he looked much more energetic after changing his clothes. Hugo and several boys went to the entrance hall outside the Great Hall. Even though they had arrived relatively early, the hall was already crowded with people because he learned from Veneto and the others that Luna would be down in a little while. Hugo simply walked out of the castle along the gate to breathe in some fresh air. As a result, he happened to see a huge figure walking over from the direction of the Forbidden Forest. "Good evening, Hagrid." Seeing Hagrid, who had dressed himself up according to the image style that Veneto and the others had designed last time, Hugo immediately stepped forward to greet him. Hugo, good evening." Hearing Hugo's greeting, Hagrid also waved his fan-like hand to greet him. "Why are you here instead of going inside? There are too many people inside, and my date hasn't come down yet, so I plan to stay outside for a while to get some air." Hugo shrugged. "By the way, is your date Madame Maxime?" Of course, it's Madame Maxime." Hearing Hugo ask this, Hagrid revealed a slightly simple and honest smile. "We've been getting along quite well lately, so today I plan to take this opportunity to chat with her, to chat about some deeper issues." Deeper issues? Hearing Hagrid say this, Hugo immediately pulled him to a shadowy spot by the door, then cast several protective spells to make sure no one could eavesdrop, before asking with a serious face, "The so-called deeper issues you plan to discuss with Madame Maxime, are they related to the giant bloodline within you?" "Yes, after all, it's difficult for someone like me to find someone of my kind." Hearing Hugo's question, Hagrid's answer blurted out, but he realized that something was wrong halfway through. "Wait, when did you start knowing that I'm a half-giant?" Keep your voice down." Hugo put his hand in front of his mouth and made a gesture. "Most people don't like half-giants. Why are you shouting so loudly?" Then Hugo said in a calm tone, "You know I've read a lot of books, so I can naturally deduce this from your physical resistance and your aging rate. After all, normal people don't recover so quickly after being injured by magical creatures like you do, and they don't look like they're around 40 years old when they're over 60. Adding these characteristics to your extraordinary size and your different views on various magical creatures, I was basically able to guess that you were a half-giant when I was in the first year, but don't worry, I won't tell anyone about this," Hugo said, patting Hagrid's arm. "I know about the prejudices of wizards in some areas." Chapter 342 Prepare. "Thank you for helping me keep the secret." Hagrid bent down, looking intently at Hugo's face as he spoke. "But what does that have to do with my inability to communicate with Madame Maxime?" "It has everything to do with it," Hugo sighed, looking at the bewildered Hagrid. "Especially since wizards who have any of the blood of creatures considered evil by the magical community are distrusted and ostracized by most wizards, so, I can guess that Madame Maxime must have gone through many hardships to become headmistress. If others knew she had giant blood, they would definitely attack her, so, bringing up such topics would certainly upset Madame Maxime, especially for an elegant woman like her. Associating her with the crude and barbaric giants of wizarding lore would undoubtedly be an insult. I completely forgot that point. That really shouldn't have happened." After Hugo mentioned this, Hagrid immediately realized his mistake. "I owe you one this time, or I would have definitely angered Madame Maxime. Also, regarding the matter of your bloodline, unless you can find a private and secure location, never speak of it," Hugo reminded him casually after Hagrid thanked him. "There are countless ways to eavesdrop on conversations in the wizarding world. If the news that you or Madame Maxime are half-giants gets out, it will definitely bring you both terrible consequences." After speaking, Hugo bid farewell to Hagrid and returned to the entrance hall, because Veneto had just informed him that everyone was ready and was now descending from the Ravenclaw Tower. The entrance hall was even more crowded than before, with students in colorful dress robes squeezing through the crowd, chatting with acquaintances. Harry, arm in arm with Ginny, descended the stairs. Judging by Ginny's expression, she wasn't used to wearing high heels, so she held on to Harry's arm tightly beside them. Ron walked down the stairs with a miserable expression, wearing an old, tattered dress robe with frayed edges. Seeing this, Hugo went up to greet them and said to Ron, "I remember transfiguration between objects was something we learned in our first-year transfiguration class. Why didn't you transfigure your dress robe?" "I want to transfigure it, but I can't guarantee how long my magic will last," Ron said with a distressed look. "Compared to that, the worst thing would be if the robe reverted halfway through the ball. Then I should be able to help you," Hugo said, drawing his wand. "I've tested it before, and I can maintain the transfiguration on these kinds of clothes for at least 6 hours. It's 7:45 p.m. now. If the transfiguration on this robe lasts for 6 hours," hearing Hugo say this, Ron's mood immediately improved. "That's enough to last a whole ball, so please help me out." After Ron nodded, Hugo cast a transfiguration spell on his dress robe. Soon, the inappropriate dress robe transformed into a stylish crimson dress robe with golden embroidery. Thank you so much," Ron sincerely thanked Hugo, then squeezed into the crowd to find his date. While Hugo went to the side of the grand staircase to wait for Luna. The moment he saw Luna, Hugo breathed a sigh of relief, because Luna was dressed beautifully today and hadn't worn any of her strange outfits. Her usually messy golden hair was neatly tied into a bun at the back of her head and secured with a beautiful silver hairpin. Luna wore a primrose yellow dress robe, and the pale gold embroidery on it shone faintly under the light of the torches in the corridor, giving her an ethereal aura. "Good evening, Hugo." Luna walked to Hugo's side and greeted him. "Veneto and Hermione need a little more time to come down. Hopefully, they won't be late." Hugo shook his head helplessly, then looked at Luna and said, "I think you look very beautiful today." "Thank you," Luna nodded gently. "After all, there are hardly any Nuggles to be seen in the castle today, so I naturally have to dress myself up a bit." Just then, the students from Boxburtons walked in from outside the castle, led by Fleur Delacour in a silver dress robe. The carefully dressed Fleur looked stunningly beautiful, which made her date, Ravenclaw Quidditch team captain Roger Davies, occasionally show a somewhat foolish grin. Davies probably didn't notice the mistletoe hanging on those holly trees, Luna whispered to Hugo. Otherwise, he definitely wouldn't be smiling so foolishly right now. Just as Hugo was listening to Luna's words with a smile, a group of Slytherin students came up the steps from their underground common room. Among this group of Slytherins, the one walking in the front was Malfoy, who was wearing a high-necked dress robe of black velvet, looking like a parish priest. Pansy Parkinson wore a frilly, pale pink robe and clung tightly to Malfoy's arm. Crabbe and Goyle followed behind them, both dressed in green, like two large, moss-covered rocks. Clearly, these two big guys hadn't found dates, and they would probably have to dance together at the ball later. Hugo was curious as to which of them would take the female lead. With only 7 or 8 minutes left before the start, Hugo sensed through the Admiral network that Veneto and Hermione were coming down the stairs. However, the entrance hall was already crowded at that time, so he couldn't see them. Finally, the time came to 8 p.m., and the oak front doors of the Great Hall were opened. At that moment, a neat sound of footsteps came into the entrance hall from outside. Everyone who heard the sound turned their heads and saw the Durmstrang students and Professor Karkaroff walking in together. Krum walked in the front, accompanied by a Hufflepuff 7th-year girl in a lake green robe. Looking over Krum and the others' heads, Hugo saw that a lawn in front of the castle had been transformed into a grotto, twinkling with fairy lights. This meant that there were hundreds of living fairies, either sitting in magically conjured rose bushes or fluttering their wings on statues that seemed to be Santa Claus and his reindeer. At this moment, Professor McGonagall's voice rang out, "Champions, please come this way." The crowd immediately made way, allowing the champions to reach Professor McGonagall's side. Through the gaps in the crowd, Hugo saw that Professor McGonagall was wearing a red tartan robe, with a rather unsightly thistle wreath decorating the brim of her hat. Both tartan and thistle are representative of Scotland. Professor McGonagall's attire clearly intended to embody Hogwarts' position as host of the Triwizard Tournament. Unfortunately, there weren't many people with good aesthetic sense at Hogwarts, and that didn't include Professor McGonagall. So, her outfit naturally looked bizarre. Chapter 343 Dinner. While the champions, along with their partners, waited to the side with Professor McGonagall, the crowd began to move, heading into the Great Hall. Hugo, seeing this, squeezed into the crowd with Luna and entered the hall. The Great Hall was decorated beautifully today, with shimmering silver frost covering the walls and a starry night sky on the ceiling, adorned with hundreds of sprigs of mistletoe and garlands of ivy. The 4 house tables were gone, replaced by 100 small tables lit with lanterns, each with about 10 empty chairs. It seemed this was where everyone would be seated according to the arrangement. Everyone could sit wherever they liked today, except for the front table reserved for the champions. There was no need for the usual strict house segregation. But in reality, everyone still habitually gathered with their own houses. Slytherins were particularly obvious in this regard. While most round tables dominated by other houses would have some students from other houses, the tables dominated by Slytherin students would only have some empty chairs besides their own. From this, one could see that Slytherin was indeed unpopular. For most wizards, even if they looked down on muggles, they couldn't accept Slytherin's race extermination-style theories. Hugo and Luna naturally found a table dominated by Ravenclaw students and sat down. However, besides the Ravenclaw students, a Hufflepuff was also sitting at the table. "Cho, I thought you'd be sitting with the Hufflepuffs," Hugo greeted the Asian upperclassman after sitting down. "After all, Cedric is Hufflepuff's Quidditch star." No, it's not Quidditch time now. "So of course I'll stay here with Cho," Cedric said, shaking his head after hearing Hugo's words, then looked at Cho Chang with a loving gaze. Seeing this, Hugo immediately felt that Veneto replacing Cedric was a very good thing. At least it could prevent the death of an innocent person. As the students entered, the headmaster and professors also came out from another small door and began to enter, all wearing dress robes like the students. After everyone had basically taken their seats, Professor McGonagall led the champions and the partners towards a large round table at the front of the hall where the judges were sitting. And the people in the hall applauded enthusiastically. "This is a surprise." Hugo opened his eyes in surprise as he watched the pairs of champions walk through the project door and into the hall. Because he saw Veneto actually walking in hand with Hermione. Veneto was wearing a black and red dress robe today, paired with her silver-white pigtails, porcelain-like white skin, and burgundy eyes, making her look like a delicate doll no matter how you looked at her. Hermione, on the other hand, was wearing a sky-blue dress robe with silver trim today. After using magic to smooth her hair and tie it into a single braid behind her head, she had a heroic air. After all, Hermione's personality itself belonged to that of a strong woman, and coupled with the unique iron-bloodedness of a soldier after transforming into a ship girl, it did indeed suit this masculine style of clothing very well. "How did you two get together?" Hugo asked curiously through the Admiral network. "But you really gave me an unexpected surprise. It's very simple. The handbook only said that each champion needs to find a partner, but it didn't stipulate that the partner must be of the opposite sex," Veneto said, appearing quite proud. "And we ship girls have a special way to quickly learn to dance through the Admiral network, and at the same time, we can have a tacit understanding that ordinary humans can't reach. Even you, Admiral, can't reach this state without proper enhancement. Therefore, for this kind of dance, we spend most of our time dancing with our own people. Otherwise, dancing with others always requires accommodating others, which is not enjoyable." "Okay, I know we humans are indeed a bit weak," Hugo said through the Admiral network, somewhat helplessly. "I hope you two have a good time at the dance today." After chatting with Veneto and the others, Hugo quickly looked at the round table where the judges were sitting, and found that Mr. Crouch was sitting there, but his eyes were dark and his eye bags were obvious. At the same time, a distressed look appeared on his face. The imperious curse on Crouch has been lifted, and his soul has recently been attacked. It's highly likely that his memory has been modified. Enterprise, who was sitting not far from Crouch, said through the Admiral network at this time. "This also means that Noseless Guy should have gotten what he wanted from him, and the plan is proceeding perfectly. It's just that we haven't figured out what happened during this time." "There's no need to worry about this at all," Hugo had figured it out during this time. "We have already taken all the countermeasures, and war may not be a bad thing for us now." "That's right," Enterprise smiled after hearing Hugo's words. "Anyway, as far as we are concerned, no matter when this war breaks out, or under what circumstances it breaks out, we will inevitably achieve the final victory." For the ship girls, with a perfect completion of the first round of the plan, they were already prepared to face the worst-case scenario on the front lines. So they were not afraid of war. It could even be said that, as the most powerful weapons of war in the era when their main bodies were human, the ship girls had war-loving genes in their bones. If it weren't for the Admiral as a buffer, those fully unleashed abyssal ship girls would be enough to turn the world upside down. After chatting with the ship girls, Hugo focused his attention on the table in front of him. The golden glittering plates were still empty, but everyone had a small menu in front of them. Obviously, several house elves in the kitchen below were on standby for each table, so they could pull off this kind of live cooking trick. After confirming that everyone was in place, Professor Dumbledore carefully looked at his menu, and then, facing his plate, said very clearly, "Pork chops." Pork chops appeared immediately. The others suddenly realized and followed suit, ordering their favorite food for their plates. However, compared to Dumbledore, the old man, young people preferred beef or lamb. Hugo noticed that everyone at the champions' table was different. Crumb looked somewhat silent, just eating with his head down. And Fleur Delacour was criticizing Roger Davies, her partner, for Hogwarts decorations. Fortunately, Dumbledore was an old man who had experienced many things, so he timely diverted some topics that could easily cause conflict with some humorous words, successfully maintaining the harmony on the field. Finally, everyone was full, so Dumbledore stood up and asked the students to stand up as well. Then he waved his wand, and all the tables flew to the wall with a whoosh, leaving a space in the middle. Then he conjured a high stage and attached it to the base of the right wall, making all the preparations for the main part of the dance, the dancing. Chapter 344 Dance. After clearing the floor, Professor Dumbledore conjured a high stage against the wall, upon which sat a drum set, several guitars, a lute, a cello, and several organs. The wizard's musical instrument setup seems a bit different from what we're used to, Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral network. In the past, the Navy was a standard aristocratic branch, so ship girls like Veneto had decent musical literacy. So, upon seeing the lute paired with a drum set, she immediately looked puzzled, because in her eyes, these two instruments were clearly not suitable to be played together. Maybe the things wizards like are different from us, Hugo said. At this moment, he saw two witches dressed in an 80s rock style walk onto the stage with their instruments. As soon as the two witches took the stage, the audience erupted in thunderous applause. The two musicians picked up their respective instruments amidst the applause, the lanterns on the tables went out, and all four champions and their partners stood up. The Weird Sisters played a slow, melancholic tune. Following the rhythm of the music, the four champions first led their partners into the brightly lit dance floor, and then danced gracefully. The reason for choosing such a piece for the opening dance was simple. After all, apart from Crumb, none of the other champions had any experience in dancing before. If the tempo were too fast, it might embarrass some people. Indeed, someone here mainly refers to Harry. At least for now, Harry's dancing skills are limited to not stepping on Ginny's feet. As for his dancing posture, it's really hard to describe, especially when compared to the other three pairs of champions. Harry's dance seemed a bit unimpressive. Because apart from him, the others' dances looked obviously professional. After a short prelude, Dumbledore and Madame Maxime stepped onto the dance floor together and soon began to waltz. For Madame Maxime's size, their dance was definitely elegant. Even Moody, who usually had a serious face, went down to the floor, but his prosthetic leg made him look a bit clumsy, forcing his partner, Professor Sinistra, to keep a nervous eye on his fake leg. The most exaggerated was Filch, who stood by the edge of the dance floor holding Mrs. Norris, seemingly dancing as well. Unfortunately, the cat didn't seem to like it, with an expression that said, "There's always a troublemaker trying to harm me." The music played, other students gradually entered the dance floor, and the champions were no longer the center of attention. And it was at this time that Hugo pulled Luna into the dance floor and started dancing. "You're wearing the brooch I gave you?" "Thank you." Because the light was relatively dim just now, Luna didn't recognize the Spectre Specs fish brooch that Hugo was wearing on his chest until now. As for the reason Hugo did this, it was simple. After all, his clothes were also military uniform style. If he wore the Order of Merlin, it would be a bit too flashy, so the Spectre Specs fish brooch could just fill the blank on his chest anyway. This brooch is only the size of a bottle cap, so no one can tell it's a Spectre Specs fish from a slight distance. Only when two people are dancing together like this can they discover it. After all, we're friends, Hugo said seriously, pulling Luna in a circle to the rhythm of the music on the stage. Contrary to what Hugo had imagined, Luna's dancing skills far surpassed most of the students present. And after chatting for a few words, he learned that Luna had specifically studied dancing at home. The organ played its last trembling note, the band stopped playing, and the opening dance ended smoothly. The Great Hall erupted in enthusiastic applause again. After the first song ended, the Weird Sisters changed to another song with a faster rhythm. Compared to the previous song, this song was obviously more suitable for young people compared to the previous song. Luna was obviously much more relaxed when dancing to this song. Fortunately, Hugo, with the help of the other ship girls on the Admiral network and his extraordinary physical strength, was finally able to keep up with her steps. A few minutes later, the second dance also ended. Seeing that Luna looked a little tired, Hugo very gentlemanly offered to rest on the nearby seats for a while, Let's sit down and rest for a while. I'll get you a drink, Hugo said after Luna sat down, and then walked towards the table with a pile of drinks. After bypassing a large group of happily dancing people, Hugo came to the table with drinks, just in time to see Harry walking over from the other direction. Everything is good in the Great Hall today, but the temperature is really a bit high, Harry said, greeting Hugo, so I'm getting some drinks for Ginny. Indeed, the Great Hall is usually not so crowded with people dancing, so naturally it hasn't been this hot before, Hugo said. Taking 2 bottles of butterbeer from a bucket full of ice, and then complained, clearly everyone is a wizard. I think it shouldn't be too difficult to adjust the temperature in the Great Hall. I just don't know why everyone doesn't do it. I guess it might be to reduce everyone's frequency of going to the bathroom. Just as Hugo said this, Veneto suddenly transmitted her playful voice through the Admiral network. These dress robes are no different from the dresses in the ordinary Muggle world. They are difficult to put on, and even more difficult to take off. Especially those women's dresses, because they are made too close-fitting. It's not easy to put on and take off once, so, if the temperature in the room is a little higher, the water in everyone's body will be discharged through sweat, which can avoid this kind of trouble common in dances. That sounds very reasonable. Wait, how do you know so much about this? Hugo subconsciously nodded slightly, and then suddenly said as if he had thought of something, because dances were very common in the Navy in the past, especially in the Italian Navy, Veneto said with a soft laugh. So you'll naturally become familiar with this kind of thing after seeing it a lot. Okay, this is learning from practice, Hugo sighed. Then, together with Harry, he carried 2 glasses of iced butterbeer each and walked towards the place where the ladies were sitting. After everyone finished drinking the iced drinks, the Weird Sisters happened to change to a slower song. So Hugo and Luna went up and danced another song. After this song ended, the Weird Sisters played their signature song, which, to be honest, had a very disco style. The atmosphere in the venue was completely ignited, and the explosive rhythm ignited this ancient castle. The young wizards happily twisted their bodies to the rhythm. It seems a bit noisy. I want to go out and take a walk. Would you like to come with me? Hugo didn't really like this kind of music, and the Great Hall was now noisy and stuffy, so he asked Luna. Okay, Luna nodded and said, I also want to see what the garden looks like outside. I heard that Professor Dumbledore has obtained many special magical creatures and put them in the garden. Many of them are not common in England. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345 Garden and Chat? Because it was too noisy on the field, Hugo and Luna quietly slipped out the door and into the entrance hall. At this moment, Hermione also squeezed out of the crowd by the Veneto window. It seems you also find it a bit stuffy in the hall. Seeing Hugo and Luna come out, Veneto greeted them warmly and walked with them towards the outside of the castle. The front door was open, and as they walked down the steps, the fairy lights in the rose garden twinkled. They found themselves surrounded by low bushes, ornate winding paths, and huge stone statues. Hugo could hear the splashing of water, like a fountain, and occasionally saw people sitting on open work benches. Mostly, it was a man and a woman sitting on the same chair, occasionally 2 girls or 2 boys. Much better. It was really too stuffy and hot in the room just now, Luna said, gently patting her chest. At this time, the 4 of them were walking along a winding path through the rose bushes. Soon, Luna said goodbye to everyone because she wanted to go and see if there were any mutated luminous mosses near the rockery decorated with some kind of Mediterranean plants. And I don't understand why you're making such a fuss, Igor. A voice suddenly came from the other side of the flower bushes. Severus, you can't pretend this isn't happening. Karkaroff's voice sounded frightened and hoarse, as if afraid of being overheard. For months, it's become more and more obvious. I'm very worried now. I can't deny it. Then run, Snape said impatiently. Run, I'll cover for you. But I want to stay at Hogwarts. Snape and Karkaroff turned a corner. Snape held his wand and blasted the rose bushes aside. He had a stern face and a nasty expression. Screams came from many of the flower bushes, and several dark figures darted out. Ravenclaw, 10 points deducted. Fawcett, Snape said fiercely. A girl ran past him. Hufflepuff, 10 points deducted. Stebbins, another boy chased after the girl. Watching the retreating figures of the fleeing young wizards, Karkaroff looked somewhat alarmed. He nervously reached out to touch his goatee, then wrapped the beard around his fingers. "Looks like this isn't a good place to talk." Snape glanced around the path, where there was no one. He suddenly turned and strode away, his long black robes billowing behind him. Karkaroff also hurried away after Snape. After the two figures disappeared from the path, there was a rustling sound from the edge of a bush, and then Hugo and the two ladies emerged from the bush. "Luckily we hid in time just now, or it would have been terrible if Snape had caught us," Hermione said, smoothing out the wrinkles on her skirt. "By the way, why is Karkaroff so worried? As far as I know, Karkaroff and Snape were both Death Eaters before, and they have the Dark Lord's magical mark on them," Hugo said through the Admiral network after looking around. "For months, it's become more and more obvious." "Oh my god," Hermione suddenly seemed to realize something and exclaimed in the Admiral network. "Could it be that the dead can also be resurrected? We saw that person in our first year. Some things are inevitable. At least we still have Professor Dumbledore ahead of us, and we really don't need to worry about it now." Hugo comforted his sister. The topic of Death Eaters was indeed a bit unpleasant. In silence, they came to a large stone reindeer. They looked past a stone deer and saw a tall fountain of water splashing and sparkling. Two vague giant figures sat on a stone bench, gazing at the fountain in the moonlight. Then, Hugo heard Hagrid speaking. "I knew it in my heart as soon as I saw you," he said in a strangely hoarse voice. "What did you know, Hagrid?" Madame Maxime asked, her deep voice carrying a hoarse sound. Hagrid suddenly remembered his conversation with Hugo before entering the castle, so he abruptly changed the subject to, "I think you and I are both a bit lonely. After all, our bone structure is much larger than normal." "Yes, there is indeed a special sense of loneliness. After all, people always reject those who are somewhat different from them. Just like Muggles used to reject those with red hair, and in this regard, wizards are no exception." Obviously, Hagrid's words, like a stroke of genius, resonated with the softest spot in Madame Maxime's heart, and Madame Maxime also began to recall her past days. Obviously, although Hagrid was a bit careless, he was not stupid at all. So, after being reminded in advance, he naturally knew how to avoid the minefield. Finally found you." Just as Hugo and the two ladies were walking through the flower bushes full of flowers on both sides, Luna suddenly walked out of a nearby flower bush. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Hermione asked. She had never been able to understand Luna's thoughts before. But after becoming a ship girl and dealing with Quincy, she found that she could understand the other party. "I didn't find any mutated luminous moss. Obviously, there are no Carpelhorn Snorkax living around these thorn trees." Luna shook her head, looking a bit dejected, but she quickly perked up again. "But I think everyone is in very good condition today. At least there aren't many heliopaths in the garden. You could even say there are fewer than at any other time." "You always talk about heliopaths. Can you tell me what they are?" Veneto asked curiously after hearing Luna say this. In fact, this was also a question that Hugo had always wanted to figure out. Because the novels and movies in his previous life had considerable differences in this regard, he had always wanted to figure out what heliopaths were like in this real world. Heliopaths, they're invisible, and they float into your ears and mess up your brain. Hearing someone ask this, Luna immediately reacted and said, "Once they latch onto someone, that person will become emotionally worse." Speaking of this, Luna looked at Hugo and then with a smile, "Actually, you guys are the strangest people I've ever met, because there are basically no heliopaths around you. Especially Hermione, your situation is the most special. It used to look like you were often attacked by heliopaths, but since shortly after last Christmas, it seems like those annoying guys won't come near you anymore." A natural legilimens, through the Admiral network, Hugo and the others immediately understood what Luna was talking about. According to Rowling, Luna can be said to be the opposite of Hermione. That is to say, Hermione is a person who follows rationality, while Luna is more inclined to sensibility. But now it seems that this sensibility should be based on some special ability. For example, being able to easily understand some of the thoughts of others, which may be why Luna feels that she lives a little more clearly than ordinary people. Chapter 346 set off. At midnight, the band stopped playing, and everyone gave them one last round of enthusiastic applause before heading towards the entrance hall. Many wished the ball could have lasted longer. It was their happiest night since entering the school on the second day of Christmas. Everyone woke up late, engaging in desultory conversations, frequently interrupted by yawns. Hermione's hair had become bushy again. Before the ball, she used her ship girl abilities to make her hair smooth. However, to avoid arousing suspicion, she could only gradually make her hair more manageable each day. After breakfast, Hugo and Hermione, along with some other students, headed to Hogsmeade Station. Due to this year's Christmas ball, the school had arranged a special Hogwarts Express train to take students home after Christmas. As for Firefly and Veneto, they remained at the school because the ship girls felt this would better conceal their relationship and prevent malicious individuals from discovering it and taking advantage. Upon boarding the train, they found the carriages quite empty, as many younger students had already left. Hugo and his sister were even able to occupy a compartment all to themselves. What exactly did Massachusetts and the others discover? Hermione asked curiously, drawing her wand and casting several spells to ensure the compartment was safe. They urgently requested our presence even during Christmas. Hermione would have preferred to stay at school and read if Massachusetts hadn't extended such a sudden invitation. I'm not sure, they said they have a surprise for me, Hugo replied, shrugging. But judging from their tone, this discovery is definitely groundbreaking. After speculating for a while about what the ship girls might have discovered, a tapping sound came from the window. It was an owl carrying a newspaper. My subscription to the Daily Prophet has arrived, Hermione said, opening the train window to let the owl in, and then unfolding the newspaper. She gasped as soon as she saw the front page. Is today's news that sensational? Hugo asked, moving closer to his sister and looking at the newspaper in her hand. He was shocked by the headline on the front page: Harry Potter's orientation becomes a mystery. First a brother, then a sister. What's the meaning? The boy who lived, love and hate between him and the pure-blood families. Beneath these sensational headlines were two photos. One showed Harry and Ginny holding hands as they walked along the rose-covered path in the garden, while the other showed Ron sitting alone at a round table in the ballroom. As expected, this is Rita Skeeter's writing, Hermione said, quickly flipping to the end of the article and finding the words by Rita Skeeter, special correspondent. That woman just wants to stir up trouble. There's nothing we can do. The Daily Prophet has to make a living too, Hugo said, glancing at the official article about the Christmas ball on page 3. I heard from others that the Daily Prophet wasn't like this a decade ago. But since Fudge came to power, he's reduced funding to improve economic figures, including funding for the Daily Prophet. Out of desperation, the Daily Prophet had to try commercial operations, which required a sufficient number of subscribers to earn enough money. Obviously, simply reprinting Ministry of Magic announcements wouldn't attract many people to subscribe. So, the newspaper organizers had to make the newspaper's style similar to The Sun, and that's when Rita Skeeter became famous. I understand, it all comes down to money, Hermione said, shaking her head as she looked at the newspaper in her hand. At least, compared to those formal match reports, news like this, which starts with a picture and relies entirely on fabrication, is more eye-catching. That's right, but we should also feel fortunate, Hugo said, pointing to the corner of the newspaper where the match report was. At least Veneto lacks the sensationalism of Harry, so they didn't target her with fabricated news. By lunchtime, almost everyone knew about Rita Skeeter's new report. As Hugo went out to buy lunch, he heard similar conversations coming from every compartment. Finally, the train pulled into King's Cross Station amidst the heavy snow. When Hugo and Hermione left the station, Repulse was already waiting for them at the entrance. Since Hugo and Hermione had said they wouldn't be home for Christmas, the Granger parents had taken the opportunity to travel to Southeast Asia. With no one at home, Hugo and Hermione headed straight to Hood's residence. Can you tell us what Massachusetts and the others have been up to? Hugo asked his headmate on the way. All I know is that since the situation with the Soviets was resolved, the United States has become our biggest source of resource outflow. It's actually the result of everyone's collective effort, involving a series of extremely complex experiments, Repulse said as she drove. If this project succeeds in the end, we can change the course of history for the entire planet. The course of history for the entire planet, Hermione exclaimed, her eyes widening. Is it really that important? Of course, I'm not saying I don't trust you, but this news is just too shocking. Actually, I had the same thought as you before I understood the situation, Repulse said, shaking her head with an incredulous expression, but that's the reality. They've achieved something unprecedented. Honestly, I took a look, and I can say that even the preliminary results far exceed my previous imagination. Hugo and Hermione's interest was piqued by Repulse's words. So, after entering Hood's mansion, they hastily ate a little of the dinner Hood had prepared and then used the subdimension to cross the Atlantic Ocean to America. When Hugo and Hermione emerged from the subdimension, they realized they hadn't appeared in the ship girls' core locations of New York on the East Coast or Los Angeles on the West Coast. Where's this? Hugo asked, looking bewildered at the surrounding buildings. From the environment, it seemed to be a city located in an inland desert. We are now in Mexico, in a small city located less than 30 kilometers from the Mexican border, Repulse explained simply. And our secret laboratory is now located in the desert hills outside the city. This is mainly for concealment and security, because this laboratory doesn't only contain us, but also personnel from various forces taken in by the ship girls. In addition to wizards, there are also squibs and even ordinary people, Repulse explained as she walked out of the room, opened the car door in the courtyard, and motioned for them to get in. This is clearly a public violation of the statute of secrecy, so we have to be careful. Chapter 347 Secret Base. The car slowly drove through the city streets and headed towards the suburbs. Through the clear car window, Hugo saw the bustling crowds outside, appearing quite prosperous. Is this really northern Mexico, near the U.S. border? Hugo asked with some surprise, looking at the prosperous scene outside the car window. After all, the chaos in northern Mexico had been present since the 1980s, so the appearance of such a thriving small town here seemed somewhat out of place. Of course, this is the U.S.-Mexico border. As long as your fists are big enough and you have enough money, you can do anything. Here and here Admiral asked this, Repulse excitedly replied while driving. Compared to the local warlords, our fists are much bigger than theirs, and we also have much more money than them, so we have smoothly controlled a large area. Won't we arouse unnecessary suspicion? After being a ship girl for so long, Hermione had also learned about many things, so she asked a key question. Of course not. California and Oklahoma are in charge here, but on the surface, ordinary Americans come here to invest. This is not uncommon in various regions along the U.S.-Mexico border. More importantly, after stabilizing the local security, whether it's seaside tourism, the gambling industry, or the export of various tequilas, it's all very profitable, so it won't arouse too much suspicion. During the rest of the journey, Repulse talked about the struggles of the American shipgirls here. It must be said that, apart from the Soviet Union, the biggest commotion was caused by this group of American shipgirls. For this group of American shipgirls who were originally responsible for the Pacific region, their names destined them to be very suitable for this environment, which resembled the American West in the 19th century. According to Repulse, the shipgirls had a falling out with the local snakes within 2 weeks of arriving here, and then there was a violent confrontation that lasted for half a year. The local snakes' violence gradually escalated from pistols and knives, eventually even using large-caliber machine guns and IEDs containing more than 20 kilograms of TNT. The shipgirls' retaliatory measures also escalated accordingly. From Chicago typewriters and M1 carbines all the way up to 127mm high-angle dual-purpose secondary guns, it must be said that the local snakes' armed forces, wearing heavy body armor and driving self-made armored vehicles, were much stronger than the local official forces. But these things were worthless when facing M2 heavy machine guns and 40mm Bofors, and when the shipgirls easily used 30 rounds of 127mm secondary guns to blow up the local snakes and their fortress-like strongholds in the final battle. This large area immediately became quiet. After stabilizing the security, the shipgirls began the real construction. Compared to violent warfare, the development brought about by this construction completely destroyed the foundation for the survival of the local outlaws. All of this has created a unique prosperity in this area, and the peace paved with thousands of corpses in half a year has also prevented the outlaws in other areas from crossing the line after the shipgirls demarcated their sphere of influence. So, our area is the safest place in the entire Mexico region. Last year, even National Geographic magazine specifically listed this area as the most suitable place for travelers to visit in the United States and its surrounding areas. As Repulse spoke, she drove into Seaside Beach along with the surging traffic. Judging from the surrounding car license plates, there were many travelers from the United States, including many families traveling together. This also showed that what Repulse said was true, because if it wasn't a truly safe place, travelers would mainly be adults and wouldn't bring children. Are you sure the base entrance is here? Hugo asked with some surprise after the car parked in the Seaside Beach parking lot. He had always thought that this kind of secret base would be placed in some remote wilderness, but he didn't expect it to be in this tourist attraction full of people. Actually, we also wanted to set it up in some remote wilderness before, but if we did, it would be difficult for the blanks or even ordinary people who work for us to come here to work, Repulse said through the Admiral network while leading Hugo and the others through the crowd. So, we have set up entrances and exits in several densely populated places, and even given those workers other professional reputations in these companies, so it is very convenient for them to work. The entrance to the secret base was located inside that office building. After entering an office, Repulse swiped a card she carried with her on a machine in a drawer, and then a door disguised as a cabinet opened. Behind the cabinet was a secret room with an elevator. Next, we are going to the underground base 370 meters below the surface. Next, you will see one of our most technologically advanced research projects in this world, Repulse said, pressing the button. A little over a minute later, the elevator dinged and stopped. As the elevator door opened, Hugo saw two guards in full power armor standing at the door. Power armor, Hugo exclaimed softly, then turned to look at Repulse. Is this the result of your research? Combat-ready power armor? These two sets of power armor did surprise Hugo a bit, but nothing was beyond his expectations. After all, the difficulties in creating this kind of thing mainly focus on energy and control systems, which can be completely compensated by magic. This is indeed one of the results of our research, but it is only a very small part of the results. After saluting the two guards, Repulse led Hugo and the others towards the depths of the tunnel, saying at the same time, accurately speaking, we are currently conducting a research. The goal is to combine magic and the most advanced technology as much as possible, and then create some unprecedented miracles. This underground base was much larger than the one located in the Western Balkans. So Hugo and the others quickly got into an electric car and moved downwards along the tunnel. As the electric car moved forward in the tunnel, Hugo noticed that there were branches appearing on both sides of the road, and some personnel, vehicles, and even special robots were walking back and forth along the tunnel. These tunnels led to various areas, including residential areas, factories, ecological domes, and even large-scale planting areas. Repulse proudly introduced everyone's construction achievements to Hugo and the others. In other words, we are now building an underground ecosystem. This is partly to maintain as much secrecy as possible, and partly to experiment for our ultimate goal, artificial ecosystem. Hermione suddenly widened her eyes, because it was also in 1991 that the famous Biosphere 2 experiment began to operate. And by 1994 this experiment could be said to be a complete failure. Also because of this reason, scientists inferred that an ecosystem with too little space cannot be maintained for a long time, so Hermione was surprised by the artificial ecosystem that Repulse said. Yes, an artificial ecosystem, Repulse nodded, with a current level of technology. Of course, this cannot be completed, but if magic is added, the work will become particularly simple. Chapter 348 To the Stars. Because Hugo and the others were sightseeing along the way, it took them nearly 20 minutes to reach the most central location of the entire base. This was a huge space reinforced with magic, and it looked very busy inside. Many robots and alchemical golems were working with workers wearing crude exoskeletons to manufacture one massive, sealed canister-shaped metal structure after another. Soon, Hugo noticed a scene here that clearly violated the secrecy laws. Ordinary people in exoskeletons were welding those metal structures, and beside them, several wizards were waving wands, installing metal plates inlaid with magical runes onto the metal structures. Won't this really cause any problems? Hermione asked Prestige nervously. With such a large-scale operation, can we really guarantee sufficient secrecy? Don't worry, this place has been operating for several years, but it has always been under the premise of secrecy, Prestige said with considerable pride. We have enough ways to keep the secrets here. According to Prestige, they had set up a large number of shielding spells on every inch of land here, which could completely prevent the magical reactions below from being discovered by others. In addition, everyone here had been inspired by both Sulian and St. George, so it was impossible for them to actively reveal the secrets of this place. I can say for sure that our inspirational ability is even comparable to Grindelwald in his prime. Under these circumstances, no one will betray this place, Prestige introduced. Of course, in addition to spiritual inspiration, we also have magical contracts plus Dzerzhinsky's subordinates as our last line of defense to ensure that the local situation will not be exposed. That sounds really impressive. At this time, everyone walked to the bottom of this huge space, and then Hermione looked at the sealed container, which was about 3 or 4 stories high, and asked, however, what exactly is the core of this plan? Also, what exactly are these things being manufactured? Why do they need to be so huge? I think this seems to be some kind of space that needs to be sealed. Hugo looked at the huge diameter of those containers and then looked at Prestige. Are you planning to build an underwater base? Yes, and this is just our first step, Prestige nodded. At this time, the 3 people passed through the busy construction site and came to an office where Zizhang was drawing blueprints. After greeting Zizhang, Prestige walked to a desk and took out 2 documents from the drawer and handed them to Hugo and Hermione, and then said, "Here's our plan. Now we have completed most of the tasks in the plan, so we will most likely be able to complete the first step of the plan by the end of this semester. In fact, this base is only the final core department. The operation of the base is supported by our global production network. Only a small part of what you see is produced locally, and most of it is shipped in from the outside." Along with Prestige's explanation, Hugo began to read the plan. As a result, he was shocked by the content of the plan at the first moment because according to the plan, the ultimate goal of this plan is interstellar colonization, and the first step that can be completed by the end of this year is to build a permanent space station in Earth's geosynchronous orbit that can support the long-term survival of 1,000 people at this time. Hugo suddenly remembered the containers he had just seen. Obviously, in addition to building an underwater launch center, the most important thing in those containers was to manufacture various spare parts for the space station for ordinary people. The difficulty of launching such a huge structure into the sky has exceeded the existing technical level, but for wizards, magic can reduce the difficulty by 90%. Also, because of the existence of magic, the ship girls can ensure that the entire process of launching and operating the space station is completely concealed from everyone's eyes, and the goal is advanced step by step in secret. Where exactly did you get these technologies from? After quickly reading the plan, Hugo took a few deep breaths first, and then asked because in addition to building a large permanent space station in the plan, there are 2 more steps in the plan, and the difficulty of those 2 steps is much greater than building a space station among them. The second step of the plan is to build an industrial center on the moon and transfer most of the manufacturing in the plan to the moon to make full use of the rich resources on the moon for construction. The third step is to build a permanent colony on Mars and use the colony as a bridgehead for sailing into the depths of the universe and open the age of cosmic navigation. In order to achieve these goals, the ship girls have developed a series of technologies, such as energy shields, room temperature superconductors, controlled nuclear fusion, and short-range teleportation. This is why Hugo was surprised. Because these things only exist in theory and science fiction novels, and do not seem to exist in reality at all, these things were mainly researched by Zizhang in Massachusetts, Prestige explained. They have many technologies that are far beyond reality, although because of the different worlds, the technologies they master may not be usable in this place. But because of the existence of magic, they only spent a short time using magic to reach or even exceed the height that those original technologies could reach. Also, because we have successfully integrated magic and technology, we can guarantee the establishment of 3 outpost bases located in the deep sea, Earth's geosynchronous orbit, and the moon by the end of this semester, and by next year, we will build a fast space channel between the Earth and the moon and initially complete the lunar industrial zone. Then, we will build no less than 3 Mars colonization ships. What a magnificent plan. I suddenly realized that my idea of wanting to become the Minister of Magic is too conservative and small. After hearing Prestige's plan, Hermione showed a shocked expression on her face. Compared to the vast stars, the things on Earth are really not worth mentioning. But why have no wizards ever been willing to look up at the starry sky before? This is because the personal strength of wizards is too strong compared to ordinary people. Hugo thought for a while and said, "This allows them to develop much better than ordinary people in the early stages of history, but as time goes by, the development speed will become slower and slower." Why does too much personal strength lead to slower development? Hermione looked through the window glass at a wizard directing a huge part to float through the air and said, "Should it develop faster, too much personal strength will create 2 problems. Hugo looked at his sister and stretched out his fingers to explain. One is the reproduction speed. Naturally, the more powerful the creature, the lower the birth rate. For this reason, if you exclude the Weasley family, you will find that wizard families obviously have fewer children than ordinary people. Secondly, wizards are more inclined to fight alone, especially in many cutting-edge directions where there is a lack of sufficient cooperation. This is mainly because they can use magic to do the work of several people, so they will naturally ignore cooperation, and this is also an important reason why they cannot look up at the starry sky. Chapter 349 Reason. You have a point. After listening to her younger brother's analysis of the 2 major problems in the wizarding world, Hermione nodded in agreement. At least, she had already learned a lot about modern society before entering Hogwarts, and after becoming a ship girl, she had a more thorough understanding of modern industrial society in the past. The main reason wizards were more powerful than ordinary people was that the power of magic allowed them to possess productivity that ordinary people could never achieve. For example, the wizards of ancient Egypt participated in the construction of the pyramids. According to Wizarding World records, one of them could even be worth thousands of laborers at the same time. Because of the power of magic, wizards were able to break away from the limitations of food, clothing, housing, and transportation earlier than ordinary people and devote themselves to the research and understanding of the entire world. Therefore, until the first industrial revolution, the development speed of wizards was higher than that of ordinary people. And many of these advantages have been retained to this day. For example, the elixir of life, the flu network, an apparition that can allow people to instantly travel long distances, and even the time turner that can travel through time. However, with the outbreak of the second and third industrial revolutions in the ordinary human world, the development speed of the ordinary human world increased geometrically, while the development speed of wizards remained unchanged. The most important point here is that, relative to ordinary people, the production and research of wizards is closer to modern workshops and does not adopt the more efficient modern socialized mass production. It is undeniable that top wizards like Dumbledore, Grindelwald, or Nicholas Flamel can accomplish more scientific research on their own than one or even several research institutes of ordinary people. But relative to those research institutes that can concentrate the wisdom of the masses and lower individual requirements, the difficulty of giving birth to a top wizard in the magical world is obviously much greater. At the same time, wizards and ordinary people do not have much difference in IQ. Therefore, in terms of researching problems, the biggest advantage of wizards is only that their experimental efficiency is higher, which can greatly speed up research, and there is no advantage as imagined. Worse, if the inability to cooperate in production can still be changed, the wizarding world's population, this hard constraint, has become the most fatal flaw for wizards. You need to know that, whether it is technology or magic, the deeper the research, the more complex the content will be, and the number of researchers needed to figure out those problems will increase geometrically. But unfortunately, the population of the wizarding world combined is only equivalent to a small country. So it is impossible to produce many researchers at the forefront. And after this series of problems accumulated, the biggest feeling for wizards is that ordinary people are getting stronger and stronger, while wizards are gradually lagging behind the times, leading to various crises. Back then, Grindelwald discovered this. That's why he was able to bewitch so many wizards to support his views and launched that famous crisis in the wizarding world. In fact, whether it is wizards, ordinary people, mermaids, goblins, or even a series of intelligent creatures, they are all members of humanity. The difference between everyone is not that big. Renown stated the core of the Ship Girls plan: if we are trapped on Earth, everyone will naturally worry about the problem of living space. But if we put our vision into the vast universe, the problem of living space will not be a problem for a long time. That's right, Hermione looked at Renown with admiring eyes. It is obviously not a long-term solution for wizards to hide like this. But a plan like Grindelwald's will only drag down the development speed of the entire human race. Although he claimed back then that he did not hate those ordinary people who could not use magic, but only wanted to transfer the dominance of human society from ordinary people to wizards. But in reality, it is equivalent to replacing the constantly accelerating development speed of ordinary people with the unchanging development speed of wizards, which is equivalent to slowing down the development level of the entire human race. Yes. Don't forget that the resources on Earth are limited. If we can't find new sources of resources before we exhaust the Earth's resources, then we can only slowly wait for death in this world. Hugo nodded. However, there is a key question here. After all, wizards have gone further on the path of evolution than ordinary humans, which is undeniable. How do you ensure that this objective inequality does not affect the development of the plan? It's very simple. It's enough as long as everyone masters extraordinary abilities. Renown said something that shocked the Granger siblings at this time. If there is no such foundation, we would not be able to propose such a plan. Grindelwald was right about one thing: compared to wizards, there are simply too many ordinary people, so it is natural that they will have more ideas, and in order to prevent them from leaking the secrets here, turning ordinary them into extraordinarious, or giving them a chance to become extraordinarious, is the most important thing. How to change this? Hermione opened her mouth in surprise. If the boundary between wizards and ordinary people could be crossed so easily, there wouldn't still be squibs in the wizarding world. This change is certainly not turning ordinary people into wizards, because whether or not one can become a wizard is a purely genetic problem. Although we have some research in this area, it is far from the point of practical application. Renown shook her head. However, Because of your excellency, Admiral, we can transform the power in those people's hearts into real extraordinary power. It's similar to the priests or paladins in D&D tabletop games. Hermione was a little confused when she heard this, but Hugo immediately reacted. After all, he is an ancient god admiral, so it is normal to master some of the unique powers of gods. The object they are connected to through faith should not be me. After thinking for a while, Hugo suddenly said, because if it were me, I should be able to feel it. The main connection objects are the Soviet Union and St. George, Renown explained. Because they have the noblest souls of mankind, we have chosen them as objects of faith. The reason for doing this is because the biggest characteristic of ancient god faith is that it will also cause spiritual impact on believers. So we naturally have to choose the most spiritually noble existence among us as everyone's object of faith. Interestingly, the extraordinary powers mastered by those ordinary people who choose different faith goals are also different. For example, those who believe in the ideology represented by the Soviet Union master the power of dispelling magic, which can weaken or even ignore most magic. Even when many of them gather together, the anti-magic energy field surrounding their bodies can form a large-scale energy field that affects an entire space, forming a large area of chaotic magic zone. In addition, I don't know why, those ordinary people who go through the faith channel from the Soviet Union seem to be significantly stronger in science and technology than before. So many of the scientists working here now have chosen the Soviet Union as their faith anchor point. Chapter 350 New Extraordinary and New Ship Girl. Well, breakers are here. After hearing what Repulse said, Hugo immediately understood what was going on with that group of Soviet believers. To be fair, this kind of belief is indeed very effective, not only providing sufficient intellectual support for the current Starry Sky project, but also capable of inflicting fatal damage on those wizards if a real fight breaks out. Indeed, wizards also have the power to resist these breakers. For example, these breakers can only resist magic itself, but not the effects produced by magic. For another example, when facing the Cruciatus curse or the stunning spell, these breakers can continue to move forward as if nothing happened, but when facing magic like Fiend Fire, which is purely energy-based, they will appear somewhat overwhelmed. In other words, these breakers, like squibs, are immune to various spells targeting muggles, and can also cause damage to wizards with their weapons. However, they are far less flexible in combat than wizards according to the Ship Girl's internal tests. At least in a head-on battle with a 1:1 ratio of personnel, the casualty ratio between breakers and wizards will basically be locked at around 1:3. However, if the breakers obtain cover similar to heavy mechs or exoskeletons, this casualty ratio can be pulled back to 5:6. So these Soviet believers do not exist for combat. Their main task is to provide scientific research support for the project, and they can use various tools, Repulse said seriously. After all, cultivating a Soviet believer of this kind is much more difficult than cultivating a wizard. And the cost of arming them is even dozens or even hundreds of times that of arming a wizard. It is obviously not appropriate to use them as combat personnel, so the St. George believers are the real combat personnel, right? As soon as Repulse finished speaking, Hermione, who had seen some news from the Admiral's network, immediately asked, accurately speaking, they hold concurrent positions as logistics personnel and combat personnel? Repulse said seriously. Their bodies will be transformed by the holy light, becoming stronger. At the same time, they have also mastered the use of holy light power, although these powers are currently limited to removing toxins, promoting growth, strengthening the body, expelling evil, and simple energy attacks. Far less flexible than magic, they are fully capable of fighting wizards on the front lines. It's just that, compared to those superhumans we named breakers, this kind of existence we named Holy Light Knights is even more difficult to produce, so they should remain in a secret state for a short time, existing as logistics personnel. The reason why these superhumans cannot be mass-produced is mainly because their supernatural powers are closely linked to their minds. That is to say, if you cannot possess a noble soul, then you cannot possess these supernatural powers at all. More importantly, the interpretation rights of both the moral code and the superhuman quota all belong to Hugo, the ancient god admiral. The detailed operation is controlled by the ship girls. Since it is not wartime now, the ship girls hope that those who master supernatural powers are the elite of the organization, so under this guiding ideology of emphasizing quality over quantity, the number of superhumans selected is naturally not large. At the same time, this strict control of the number of superhumans also has a benefit, that is, it allows everyone in the organization to have a goal to strive for in the future, which is more conducive to the overall development of the organization. Of course, most of the ship girls are not those evil capitalists, so the standard they set is achievable for most members with just 3 to 5 years of hard work. In other words, when the system can start running smoothly, everything will be on the right track, and the future Starry Sky project will have a steady stream of human resources available. That's why our slogan is for all mankind, Repulse said, pointing to the propaganda board hanging on the office wall. Because our goal, in the long run, can indeed allow the entire human life level to leap forward. After understanding these future plans, Hugo quickly had a new job to do, summoning more ship girls to contribute to the new plan. This time, we may need some more specialized sisters. After entering a warehouse used for summoning, Repulse said while rummaging through the mediums used for summoning, although everyone can indeed research the required technologies, this also takes time. And if certain ship girls are summoned, our research time can be greatly shortened. Understood. Let me see, Hugo said, taking the list from Repulse's hand and looking at it, only to find that Garibaldi was ranked first on the list. I think you want the Polaris on Garibaldi's body. With just a little thought, Hugo understood the reason why the ship girls chose Garibaldi. After all, the most important goal next is to launch a rocket, so ballistic missiles like Polaris are very important to them. You should know that ballistic missiles and carrier rockets sometimes only differ in the payload of the warhead. So, as long as they obtain the rocket engine technology from Polaris, the next step of the plan can be completed quickly. In addition to Garibaldi, the large ships Hugo summoned this time also included Hornet, Yorktown, and Washington. The mediums for summoning these ship girls were all salvaged from the seabed during the project. The remaining fate points were used by Hugo to summon a batch of submarines and destroyers, including Gudgeon, Archerfish, 2 generations of Laffy, Adams, and the only non-American ship girl, Ulsan. The only reason why these destroyer ship girls were summoned was to provide sufficient manpower for the upcoming plan. As everyone knows, a large part of the volume and weight of manned spacecraft is used for life support systems. But for ship girls, these systems are completely unnecessary. On the other hand, the ship girl's ship equipment space can also load massive amounts of supplies, so as long as a ship girl is launched, the construction plan of the space station can be carried out quickly. And this is why Hugo summoned a large number of destroyer and submarine ship girls, because everyone's plan requires enough ship girls as workers. Wouldn't you say this constitutes child labor? After Hugo summoned the ship girls and arranged their next tasks, Hermione asked with a strange smile, "Of course not. Ship girls are not humans. Their minds are already adults the moment they are born," Hugo said with a smile, shaking his head. "So they only look like children on the surface." In the next few days, Hugo and Hermione visited this base and did some work within their capabilities. It may not be easy for others to join in and help, but for the Granger siblings connected to the Admiral's network, they can take over the work of other ship girls at any time. It must be said that Garibaldi's joining has greatly promoted the ship girls plan. Just 3 days before the end of the Christmas holiday, the first launch mission started more than a month ahead of schedule. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.